Introduction. This is not a fairy tale. This is a true story. This story unfolds in the Kingdom of Noor, whose past was full of light, justice, freedom and prosperity in every aspect. A kingdom of many glorious stories, which gradually turned into legends, fables and superstitions. Some powerful truths turned into learned formulas, recitations which in no way benefited the people of this kingdom. Some legends, fables and superfluous traditions became much more important than the simplest of truths. This obviously had delayed the advancement of human values, so much so that the most benefited groups were the feudal lords, who have had power and sovereignty for many centuries. Ignorance and fear are the main ingredients, which have tried to counter some of the most powerful weapons from certain warriors, who for centuries have been bastions of truth, fighting against the dark forces of bad, kingdom of darkness. These warriors are the mobarezan, but are also called shepherd warriors. They are from a region called Prince of Noor, the kingdom of light. Now in Noor, the majority of women cover their bodies completely with heavy garments and dark veils. Some do it to honor God, others to honor their husbands, but others are forced to wear this because of the tradition imposed by religion, which disgrace the character of God, who they claim to love and serve. They wear veils over their faces, as if they were a true reflection of the grief that exists in their souls. However, far away from there, many kingdoms claim to be free because they don't wear those veils but refuse to take the blindfolds off their eyes in order to see the truth. They despise the truth, despite having it at their disposal. Laziness, indifference and rejection to seek and accept the truth, has enslaved them to their own passions, because they have decided to be blind by choice. When did this story take place? What is the exact place and date of these events? This is anywhere and anytime. Remember, everything is real. It's so real, that it could also be your own story, because each of us has a daily battle within our own soul. Without a doubt, you are one of these characters, because as long as you are alive, you will always be exposed to being corrupted or corruptible, slave or free, leader or villain. If you are not a true warrior of Noor, maybe you're a covert warrior of bad. We all are in a battle we must win. We have to win, because we were designed not to easily give up. You and I are of those who fight to live. And we live to free, lead and empower those who are chained to the dark traditions of manipulative men of this decaying world. We do not just exist. We do not just try to survive. We are those who want to fulfill our purpose fully. We are. Prologue. The Kingdom of Noor is now under the control of the sinister forces of feudal lords and even some priests who served the Prince of Noor, with apparent loyalty. But now, they are evil and unscrupulous. They tried to hide the evidence of their true motivations, the true character that existed in their hearts, before taking a position of authority, influence or power. Of course, all these men are just looking for just that, wealth, fame or power at all costs. They do not care how much blood is shed, not even that of their loved ones, as long as it isn't theirs. They hide behind the mask of religion and politics, under mercy and justice, but none of these men and women believes in them. Their businesses flourish quickly, due to their alliances with manufacturers and vendors of lies. They hire rioters, murderers, mercenaries and even naive men to start wars, as they have done in the past. They take advantage of the pride, vanity and necessity of men. They use nationalist sentiment of radical, stupid people to provoke them to attack each other. It does not matter if they are brothers or relatives, their purpose is for both parties to continue to buy weapons and annihilate each other, behind the mask of pointless patriotism, which even though we do not want to acknowledge, is an extension of human selfishness. Everyone rivals one another, even between manufacturers and merchants of deception. Their hands are full of blood, despite not having wielded a single weapon. Gossip, lies and deceit also kill people. However, against all this injustice and manipulation, a new generation of men and women is rising. The warriors of Noor are a group of all types of people, poor, rich, illiterate, riders, men and women, who had to be armed with the truth and strive to do more than survive. They are the only ones who have learned not to coexist with injustice. They fight against oppression and seek liberation and equality between men and women. Popular religion has called them rebels, terrorists and murderers. Of course, the majority of their critics faithfully serve those who have always tried to cover up the truth, trying to manipulate it by writing a different story from reality. Only a few know that the true ideals of these warriors are much nobler than the values of the rulers. The warriors of Noor do not agree in shedding blood or spreading lies. Their purpose and desire is that all are free, through the knowledge of the truth at any cost, but still know that in every war, pain, blood and death of innocent people are never enough. At first, they only fought to defend their faith and lives, but now they fight to rescue the thousands of prisoners and slaves, who live under the grip of the dark world, the kingdom of bad. After all, what is freedom if we ignore the people around us who live oppressed in poverty, hunger, ignorance, injustice or pain? And while most of these soldiers swore allegiance until death, it is also true that some of the warriors of Noor have succumbed to the temptations of power, fame or wealth that has been offered by the Prince of Bad. Somehow, some enemies of the kingdom have infiltrated the ranks of Noor, weakening it. This has made them lose credibility in the eyes of most people, coupled with the slanders of enemies of light, who have decided to voluntarily close their eyes and ears to the truth. Also, there are others who call themselves warriors of light but fight for their own ideals. This group of warriors is better known than the warriors of Noor. Only when both sides are kneeling before the king, will he determine who will be crowned with dignity. Centuries ago, the Prince of Noor was betrayed by some of his friends, and captured by the Prince Bad, who dwells in darkness, and ordered his slow and cruel execution. It is known that the betrayal of friends causes more damage than any enemy infiltration. But history has always shown that the kingdoms that have conquered nations based on lies and betrayal are reduced to ashes by truth itself. Sooner or later, the character of each nation will be tested, and the outcome will determine the length of their strength. Corruption, ignorance and injustice weaken any nation, because consequently, the value scale is decreased, and like cancer, rebellion and anarchy appear gradually. Thus, the kingdom of Noor is now reigned by injustice, pain, suffering, disease and darkness. Even the natural realm suffers the consequences of this invasion. The sun barely shines during the day, and as for the moonlight, it is difficult for it to penetrate the thick clouds overnight. Only occasionally, the stars can barely be perceived. Hidden between darkness and daylight, there are thousands of servers in the kingdom of bad, listening to any rumors of insurrection. These dark entities know that the kingdom of Noor is alive, more alive than the soldiers of Noor know. For some of the shepherd warriors, the captivity of their prince has kept them in a state of constant sadness. Naturally, this has taken away their desire to live, the desire to fight, desire to be truly free, and as a result are now living amid poverty, pain and suffering. Only some mobarezan begin to discover that their prince now lives within themselves. But not all manage to understand what that means, and fail to conquer their own fears and doubts, which have been their own worst enemies. The Prince of Bad knows that his best weapons and strategies have been laziness, ignorance and fear, rather than poverty. He understands that people can learn to live, and even enjoy their poverty. In the kingdom of Noor, rumors begin to spread, with some trepidation that the prince has resurrected. But his enemies have tried, at all costs, to stop the spreading of this truth. There is even a death penalty for those who dare to spread this news. Only a few have reached Pana, the refuge of the prince, to be eyewitnesses that he is alive. Such witnesses have scattered throughout the kingdom of Noor, to carry the message that prince is alive and has decided to regain his kingdom, not with rudimentary weapons and death, but through truth. Yet some of the priests of the kingdom of Noor have conspired with religious and government leaders to try to stop the news. Some of these have made perverse alliances for fear of being killed, and others because they have given into the temptation of power and wealth. Judges no longer defend the causes of the homeless. Above all, they do not defend the rights of girls, young women and widows. They do not receive fair treatment in their own homes, let alone in court, just because they are women. Everything is chaos. So the mobarezan, who are shepherd warriors, have to spread the message that the prince has risen, exposing their lives. The mobarezan have been servers to the prince and now live as pilgrims and strangers in a hostile land. For them, there is no guarantee of coming out of this battle alive, but remain faithful, while others have fled. That's the nature of the true warriors of Noor. One the nightmare it cannot be. My God, this can't be true, wept Princess Shahzaid while her naked body slid into a dark corner and her hands grasped her head. Everything was confusing. Maybe she was just having a nightmare, but the cold feeling in her skin announced that it was real. Her eyes slowly grew accustomed to the darkness. With great difficulty due to her teary eyes, she could hardly tell that on the bed there was a sheet. Almost unconsciously, she covered herself in it. Her body trembled. Her lips trembled. Her soul trembled. Everything, absolutely everything was collapsing around her. Shahzaid suspected that her husband had several lovers. That was a rumor that had spread among her closest friends, but she never imagined that Tariqi would reach such lowliness. Shahzaid felt humiliated, wounded and dead. To remember what had happened moments ago brought her indescribable pain once again. So much that she wanted to die in that cold corner. She could hear the laughter of Tariqi and her lover, rolling naked on the carpet of the living room. The laughter became more thunderous, so much so that she felt the need to cover her ears with both hands. Shahzaid stood, heading to the bathroom that was in her room. She felt dirty on the outside but also inside. She took a candlestick and lit it, while a thought flew dangerously close to his mind. She was a very religious person with strong moral principles. But death would be a good solution to stop agonizing. Once and forever. She filled the bathtub with hot water, took off the sheet that was covering her body and slipped into the tub. She closed her eyes, longing to find the answer to thousands of questions that invaded her confused mind. The crying had stopped and her tears mixed with the steam from the hot water. She submerged her head as her face began to take on a pink color provided by the hot water and she started to calm down, forgetting temporarily about the events that had taken place. Suddenly Shahzaid wanted but could not breathe. She felt a hand holding her head under water. Desperately, she struggled to sit until she succeeded, pulling her head from the water and drawing air through her mouth while coughing. Her mind frantically tried to clear, while in the distance, the laughter of Tariqi and her lover could be heard, who stood naked in front of her, reveling, watching the horror of Shahzaid that was now out of the tub as she wrapped her body in a towel. Tariqi began to kiss his lover in front of Shahzaid while both slid their naked bodies into the tub. Shahzaid stormed out of the bathroom through one of two doors, as new hot tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She entered her room and locked the oak door. Only a huge force could demolish it. Again, suicidal thoughts on the mind of Shahzaid crept dangerously. Finally, sadness, crying and tiredness caused the princess to surrender to sleep. 2. The agreement. Tariqi had spent much of the night drinking cheap alcohol, accompanied by two prostitutes, unaware that a pair of eyes watched him closely from the corner of that sleazy bar. Occasionally, Tariqi turned his eyes to the dark corner where the solitary woman wearing a black burqa was. He felt the depth of her eyes over him. With difficulty, Tariqi took his eyes away from the strange woman, as she struggled, trying to convince Asha and Dust, two young prostitutes, into lowering their price, or to give him credit for his services. Both refused. But they agreed to accompany him until the last coin was spent of the little money he had left. The alcohol was of such poor quality and his money so scarce, that it was not enough to get him drunk. Tariqi stood, grudgingly seeing that his last attempt of persuasion had failed yet again. When Tariqi left the bar, the face-covered woman called the pair of prostitutes to their table. Dust and Asha looked at each other as they approached the woman. After all, prostitutes were there to give pleasure to the highest bidder. The color of money was the same, as long as the asking price was met. Both came and sat at the table as they called on a waiter. The elegant woman made the gesture to stop the waiter from approaching quickly with several bottles of the finest alcohol, which went hand in hand with the appearance of this refined woman. She had to pay at the door to be allowed to enter the bar that was exclusively for men. Due to heavy regulations of the religious and political authorities, that was a very forbidding place for a woman like her. But money spoke better in a political campaign. "I just want to hire your services. They will not be for me but for my husband. It is that fool who just left. I want you two to go to my house and have sex with him in front of me," expressed the woman. "It is important, that if I protest, cry or do anything, you do not stop doing your job. Understood? Both nodded, looking greedily at the roll of bills that was just handed to them. I don't want him knowing I paid you. His manhood could not resist it. There is more money when you have completed the job. If one of you fails me, I have money left over to wipe you off the map, said the mysterious woman. The prostitutes could not help but feel a shiver run down their spines, to such a threat. Those claims and cold eyes reminded them that in their line of work, they could face death itself each night. Get out and do your job. He will walk, so it won't take you long to reach him. I'll be waiting at my house. Both took the money and got up to follow their new nocturnal client. Although it was not a common request they had just accepted, the money they were offered for their services was more than they asked. Soon they caught up with Tariqi as he walked, almost dragging his feet. Ah, you finally decided to give me credit, the two of you, huh? Tariqi said excitedly, while he embraced the two women. Are we going to a hotel? No. Let's go to your house. We want a night of fire and passion with you and your wife. What do you think? Suggested the prostitute Ashet. Tariqi's eyes widened with surprise. His perverse mind started to awaken, even under the evil influence of alcohol. He smiled devilishly when he imaged his despicable wife's devastated face. Of course. I love that idea. We have never done that and I think she will enjoy it. As the threesome walked embracing one another and laughing loudly through the streets, a carriage came dangerously close to them, nearly taking on Tariqi, who was only limited to cursing it. At times, even dogs barked at the three, perhaps protesting about their scandalous laughter. When they arrived at the mansion, Tariqi opened the main door and walked into the living room where he found Shahzaid laying down, reading under the reflection of light from the candlestick. Shahzaid felt her heart drop. She saw that Tariqi had come with two young women, who by their appearances, looked like prostitutes. Her mind was blocked when Tariqi tried to kiss her. His breath announced that he had been drinking again. But this time, it was different. Now he had two women keeping him company inside the house, which was the one thing that Tariqi had respected since their marriage began. Shahzaid wanted to face away from her husband's breath, but Tariqi forced her to kiss him while his strong hands fell between the strips of her silk robe, wishing to undress her. What are you doing, Tariqi? Asked Shahzaid, scared. Well, don't you see, my love? We are going to have our first orgy and you will enjoy it as much as the three of us. Shahzaid tried to resist, but her husband's strong grip controlled her, while with the other hand, he started ripping her robe. The two prostitutes were standing still, watching this show in awe. Both looked at each other, and started undressing at almost the same time, abiding by the orders given by Tariqi's wife. They walked behind Tariqi and started to undress him, while Shahzaid, terrorized, begged for mercy while trying to cover her naked body. The prostitutes kissed Tariqi's body as he kissed his wife's naked body, which resisted wildly. You damn slut. I am your husband and you are obligated to satisfy me. If you don't want to die in jail, accused of adultery or marital failure, you better abide. Roared Tariqi. Shahzaid shut her eyes and stopped resisting. Tariqi was capable of that and much more. He had powerful friends of the political world. But more than them, Shahzaid feared religious leaders, more than any other thing in the world. If Tariqi wanted, Shahzaid could be stoned to death. All it would take is his word. Open your eyes, damn bastard. I want you to learn how to please me in bed. I brought you these sluts, who are better women than you so you could learn. Screamed Tariqi. Open your damn eyes. And so, a weeping Shahzaid was forced to watch how the orgy between Tariqi and the two prostitutes began. Her husband was looking over her eyes, as she had to keep her attention towards the scene. She had to learn, otherwise, to hell with her. Dust felt sorry for that fragile woman as her eyes crossed paths with Shahzaid's. It was as if Shahzaid's eyes had drilled her soul. She felt scared. Very scared. Suddenly, she got up, took her clothes and put them on rapidly. I'm out of here, said Dust. Let's go, Ashet. I don't know what's going on here, but something is definitely wrong. What for? I'm not returning the money. "I'm not about to give up my reward," said Ashet. "As you wish," answered Dust, who finished dressing up and walked toward the front door as she abandoned the house amidst the dark presence of the night. Once outside, and with Shahzade's eyes still in her soul, Dust walked firmly to her house, which was near the bar where she worked. It was likely that with the money she had made that night, she could retire from her profession and dedicate her time on better things. Suddenly, Dust felt a sharp pain on the left side, very close to her heart. She fell face first as her life seemingly escaped her. Her first reaction was to put her right hand over the area of pain. Terrorized, she felt her hand damped in warm liquids. Her hand was covered in blood. Her vision started to darken, and then she saw her. The woman with the veil over her head stood imposing over her victim. The woman's eyes radiated hatred. A cold chill traveled through the wounded prostitute. "I warned you, stupid bitch. You had to do your job and didn't do it. Did you actually think I would pay you for nothing? You'll be lucky if you live," heard the prostitute from afar as she entered into total darkness. The woman with the veil over her head smiled devilishly, walking away from the dying body. If the guards found this prostitute dead, they would probably think an unsatisfied costumer committed the crime. That would mean that no investigations would take place. The woman smiled maliciously. The calling Soleil's face was covered in sweat, even with the intense cold of night. Mentally, he tried to go over his short dream that looked like a vision, but could not find logic in what he had just dreamed. Soleil was a mature man, but not too old. He lived by himself but was not a solitary man. His personality helped him find faithful and loyal friends, even if they were not many in numbers. His philosophy in life was quite simple, based in 3 personal principles: God is sovereign, God is omnipotent, God loves me. Because of these principles, Soleil could not afford to worry about absolutely anything. He concentrated once again in the dream that had interrupted his sleep: a princess in distress, a dragon, whirlwind, arrows of fire and a royal wedding. Surely, it must have been that heavy dinner that brought this nightmare to life. Soleil understood that certain dreams lacked significance, or that he needed to receive knowledge to confirm if the vision directly affected him. And so, as he could not find any significant meaning to his dream, he laid his head against a pillow and fell asleep. He understood well that these 3 principles were the key to happiness, or at least his own happiness. God is sovereign and he does as he wants, when he wants and as he commands. God is almighty, and if he does or does not do something, it is because he decides sovereignly to intervene or not to intervene in a situation. And so, because Soleil was conscious that God loved him, anything that happened or did not happen was for the absolute benefit of Soleil, even if it didn't seem that way. The best thing he could do that night was rest. At night, he couldn't work unless he had clear instructions of what to do. Soleil ignored that his dreams were about materialized dangerously. An angel stood by his bed with his sword in hand, eyes and ears open, ready to protect the humble shepherd warrior. The bright and naked sword in the angel's hand made the demons tremble in fear as they fled the house, pushing and shoving each other. The noise made by the demons as they fled was barely perceivable by the human ear, as well as the light reflected by the angel's sword to Soleil's eyes. The light coming from the sword penetrated the darkest of corners in that small bedroom where the brave shepherd warrior slept. If Soleil's eyes were capable of seeing this light, he would have been blinded instantly. For the rest of the night, the angel stood guard next to Soleil's bed, as news of this unusual nocturnal event spread rapidly, with certain importance, across the kingdom of Bad. For solitary Shahzad woke up early. She remembered his nocturnal nightmare and was glad it was just that, a nightmare. Tariqi was not sleeping by her side but figured that her husband had gone off to another one of his sensual adventures, or maybe he was in the company of his friends, who normally ended up drunk, nearly every day. She put aside the heavy blankets and dressed in her robe, walking toward the living area. Her soul shuddered when she witnessed the nude body of a prostitute embracing her husband as they lay in the exotic and very expensive Persian rug. Her dignity as a woman had been stepped over once more. She had tolerated her husband's constant drunken nights and his secret lovers, but this, she simply could not tolerate. She was constant prey amongst royals. There were no gatherings or parties in which, when she showed, people would stop talking or change the subject completely. She only counted with very scarce friends who wouldn't dare bring up the favorite topics of the royal world, so she would not feel left out. Shahzada returned to the bedroom and showered quickly. She felt disgusted and ashamed of herself. Tariqi had constantly repeated to her that she was not a complete woman. Maybe her husband was right after all. Tears flowed, misting her eyes, a faithful reflection of her tarnished life. She dressed in a hurry. She had to leave the house before the servants arrived, to avoid the shame of having to explain who the woman keeping her husband company is. When she stepped outside of the house, she felt the fresh morning air over her face. She wasn't sure where she would go, but any refuge is good for her distressed soul. She started walking aimlessly. Her eyes were sad and empty. She didn't even notice the blood stain in the sidewalk that was being licked by 3 skinny dogs. Only one dog ignored that solitary walker, trying to obtain the last spot of blood that was left. The other 2 dogs stepped aside to let the woman pass. 5 The refuge. You are lucky to be alive, young lady, smiled Ramat at her unknown guest as she put a damp cloth over the front of her face. Don't move too much because your wound is a little deep. Thank God that the weapon used against you wasn't too poisonous, or else your fever wouldn't have gone down. The woman stood slowly from the old bed. She was a strong woman despite her age. Dust was dizzy and confused. She wanted to move, but even with her bandages well adjusted, the pain could not allow it. The memories of what happened started coming back. A client. Those eyes begging for mercy. The evil eyes full of evil. And that strange woman offering money. The money. She searched for her money between her interior clothes but didn't find it. Frustrated and in despair, she blurted out a bad word in a low voice. Probably, the strange woman took her money away, since she didn't come through for her. That money almost cost her life, and now. Ramat returned with a bowl of hot soup and some bread. By the way, young lady, when I picked you up, a big roll of money fell from your clothes. Don't worry. The criminal didn't take all of it. Dust's face lit up. Go on. Drink the soup. You haven't eaten anything in 3 days. 3 days? Yes. You have had nightmares and were talking in them. I think the fever caused that. You know. Nonsense chatters. Why did you help me? You don't know me or even know what I am. Well, it's a risk worth taking when the life of a young woman as beautiful as you is in danger. Ramat's eyes damped with emotion. But, what if guards are after me? Or if I'm a thief or a killer? The old woman looked into Dust's eyes with tenderness and compassion. If you are alive, that means God keeps giving you opportunities to change your life. You can't die until you have fulfilled His will. Come, eat, young lady. If you need anything, all you have to do is call me. My name is Ramat. My name is Dust, ma'am, she said softly. Dust. A beautiful name for a girl as precious as you. Ramat went to another room while she tuned out a song. Well, look where I ended up. After all, these warriors of Noor, even if they are somewhat religious fanatics, are not bad cooks, said Dust to herself while she devoured the soup and the bread just out of the oven. While she ate, the kind words of the old lady resonated in her mind. A beautiful name for a girl as precious as you. Tears started descending to her cheeks as she remembered those words, that when last she heard them, came from the lips of her mother. Oh, how she missed her. 20 years had passed. After her death, Dust started to wander around until she was obligated to become a prostitute. She remembered that it had been a long time since she had tasted food with the flavors of a home. Thousands of memories danced in her mind. Past memories began to resurface that were once forgotten. What was worst was that thousands of dreams could begin to resurrect from the ashes, and she was not sure if that was what she wanted now. Ramat smiled, contemplating Dust through the reflection of the mirror, as if trying to figure out what was going on inside that beautiful girl's soul. How many memories! She couldn't stop her eyes from filling up with tears from the miracle that had been taking place for the last 3 days. She worshipped God. While Dust ate, she also maintained an interesting dialogue with her conscience. Tears kept coming. For the first time, they weren't tears of pain. 6. Condidin heard a knock on the door. It was early and wasn't expecting anyone at that time. That morning, she was wearing a beautiful black silk robe. As she walked down the stairs and passed through an elegant living room, she begged the skies for it not to be another salesperson. She heard voices downstairs and observed the silhouette of a person and one of her servants through the crystals decorations of the door. Well, at least it isn't a salesperson, thought Condidin. She fixed her hair while one of the servants entered the room to announce the arrival of a visitor. Princess Shahzaid. Good day, darling, said Condidin and reached out to her with a kiss on the cheek. Forgive me for the untimely visit, apologized Shahzaid. No need to apologize, girlfriend. It's good that you came. Now we can enjoy a good cup of coffee. Come in. Shahzaid and Condidin went to the garden. As usual, one of the servants brought the coffee to the garden every morning. Only in this occasion, an extra cup was needed. You look sad, princess. Can I help you in any way? No. Thank you, Condidin. I am just tired, very tired. Condidin tried to change the subject to cheer up her friend who looked distracted, absorbed between terrible sadness and confusion. The flowers dispersed an exquisite fragrance in the soft breeze of the cool morning. However, for Princess Shahzaid, the fragrance was distant, strange and tasteless. She could hardly blurt out a yes or no in the interesting conversation being spoken by her host. Without a doubt, Condidin couldn't imagine all of the bitter pain that her friend must be going through. Shahzaid had nowhere to go, for which, she preferred to keep listening to her beloved friend. She barely sipped her coffee. One of the servants approached Condidin to announce that her carriage was ready. Oh, but how could I have forgotten? I was invited to have lunch with Mozabat, a prince of Jahan, said Condidin, apologizing. You can stay as long as you wish. If you want to go back to your home, don't hesitate to ask one of the servants to prepare a carriage to take you back. That won't be necessary, Condidin. I just went for a walk. When I noticed that I was near your home, I decided to visit. I thank you. Your conversation was very entertaining and time went by fast. Both friends said their goodbyes with a kiss on the cheek, and Shahzaid left toward her house, hoping and praying that her husband was not there when she arrived. A prince of Jahan. Mozabat isn't the most decent of men that exist in the royal world, remembered Shahzaid thoughtfully. In fact, Mozabat was infamous for his excessive behavior. He spilled immense amounts of fortune in prostitutes and alcohol. However, he was the one that invested the most money on the construction of temples of worship, winning favor and tolerance within different religious ministries. In other words, such a prince was untouchable. Tariqi visited him very frequently and uninvited, mostly if women were and alcohol were in the crowd. Shahzaid meditated on the many things that were said about her husband. She only found out about his whereabouts through third parties and the people closest to her. It had been said that Tariqi was part of the city's mafia and that he surrounded himself with extremely powerful religious authorities to cover his crimes. Rumors spread that Tariqi had homosexual relationships with Mozabat and with one of the high-ranking priests, and even though they were only rumors, Shahzaid began to worry. That explained many things, including Tariqi's recent strange behavior. Even though Shahzaid didn't smell alcohol, Tariqi behaved like a demonically possessed person. Drugs involved? No doubt. Shahzaid had to run away many times before, to avoid being abused by her husband. The way things were turning out, she would eventually die in the hands of Tariqi. She decided to visit the lawyer to start planning the divorce, even if she loved her husband. It was the right thing to do for her safety and well-being. This had to end. 7. Marjan, God has prepared the man for your life. Don't look at his handsomeness, riches or social status. Beauty, wealth and even social status can be lost in a second. Marjan wept in silence as she heard her dying mother's last words. The princes of this world are not worthy. They don't even deserve a single tear from your eyes. Guard your heart from those who can only offer you the garbage of this world. Marjan's hands gripped her mother's as if trying to stop her unstoppable departure. You know something, Margie? I am happy I educated you, loving God above all else. Your father and I are the most prized treasures on this earth, and I am happy because I know someday, The three of us will be in the presence of he who we love and serve." A wide smile illuminated the beautiful face of that woman while her eyes contemplated, evidently something else, something imperceptible to the eyes of those present in the room. Heaven's doors are opening. What a beautiful place. The melodies. Her eyes shut. Peace. Why was no one crying? Was no one hurt from the departure of that woman? Many questions ran across the demonic entities hiding between the shadows of that bedroom, which oddly enough was also invaded by light coming from powerful guardian angels. The spiritual world was not always visible to mortal eyes, only in certain occasions. Marianne and her father embraced each other tearfully, but with the certainty that one day they will be reunited in that place, where there will be no crying, no sadness or pain. That was a comforting hope. A nostalgic Marianne remembered those last moments with her mother. Some years later, after the death of her father, Kimia's father decided to adopt Marianne as one of his daughters. After all the nostalgia that she felt from remembering her mother, she could not complain about the love she received from her new family. Kimia had always treated Marianne as a sister. Marianne was a romantic and a dreamer, but also somewhat stubborn. Kimia was sweet but brave, motivated and energetic. A perfect sister and mentor for a young woman like Marianne. 8. Back to Gam. Your Majesty, I'm afraid it won't be easy to grant you the divorce. You are married by civil law, but also by religious law. Civil law annulments are relatively easy. But a religious marriage would end in, how can I put it? But my husband is unfaithful, he is an alcoholic and a drug addict. I was even told he has homosexual relationships and he even. I understand, Your Majesty, but as it turns out he is a man. In other words, in the eyes of human law and religious law, you are in obvious disadvantage. Shahzaid tried to pick the right words for her next question. Can I leave the country and start my divorce elsewhere? I'm afraid not. You would spend your entire fortune but would never be granted the divorce. As a matter of fact, you would be labeled an adulterer for the rest of your life. Shahzaid couldn't process what she had just heard. What kind of laws were those? Where had these laws been written? In hell? So, no importance was given if the woman was treated violently. Any way she turned, there were no human or divine laws that could protect her rights. According to those laws, women had been reduced to being less than an animal. She left the lawyer's office without saying goodbye. She felt suffocated from that hostile environment so lacking in justice. Now, she could see that neither her money nor social status could influence law in her favor. She felt defenseless. She was defenseless. She hurried her step. She was tired and needed to rest, but the mere idea of thinking of her house brought about sadness. As she walked, she recognized the facade of a house. Although not sure if one of her servants lived there, most likely, her memory was correct. She knocked on the door and waited for someone. She was greatly relieved. It was a faithful servant, who quickly invited her to come in. This servant was a widow. Her husband and only daughter, who was over the age of 20, had passed away in an accident, leaving her completely alone. Both women sat on a table to enjoy a hot cup of coffee, just like Shahzaid liked it. They spoke happily when suddenly, Shahzaid felt everything was spinning and passed out as a result. When she regained conscience, it was night time. It was by dim candlelight that she saw her faithful servant sleeping beside her. She smiled knowing that she was protected and fell back asleep. The next day, Shahzaid tried going back home, but her servant refused to let her go. She smiled happily thinking that if her parents had been that energetic, her life would be different from what it is now. Her servant introduced her to a young lady who was visiting. Shahzaid and the young lady spent many hours talking, which resulted in them hugging and crying together. Shahzaid spent one more night there. Was decided to go back home the next morning. After drinking a hot cup of coffee prepared by her host, Shahzaid said her goodbyes and left for her home. When she arrived, the servants in the house noticed the princess was sad and came to their own conclusion of why that was. She went up to her bedroom and packed some clothes in a trunk. She called in one of the servants and ordered her carriage be prepared. Your Majesty, forgive me, but the chauffeur has not come today. We will personally take you where you wish, said the servant. "All right. Just prepare the carriage. I will drive it myself." "As you wish, my lady." The servant hurried to follow the orders, and a few minutes later, the carriage was ready. Shahzaid asked that 2 servers bring the trunk to the carriage. The servants looked worried, as Shahzaid didn't say where she would go, but no one dared to ask, much less stop her. Once she mounted the carriage, the princess went on her way to unknown whereabouts. Shahzaid's strategy would have to give results. Not one of the servants would have to lie to her husband about her whereabouts now. Tariqi was capable of skinning each of the alive until they told the truth. They would simply say that nobody knew where the princess was heading. Shahzaid began to drift away from the Kingdom of Noor as she approached the forest. It had been a long time since she last visited the castle of Gam. An old castle that had been inherited from generation to her ancestors, and now it would be a magnificent place to take refuge and think things over. The path to Gam was confusing. It was different from the last time she crossed it, and the fear of getting lost panicked her. The sunlight started to disappear, and then she saw the castle. A sigh of relief filled her lungs. The nearest town was not far from there. She could travel by horse or hire a merchant to bring her goods from time to time. 9. A song in the night. The night was dark, darker than usual. Saleh, the mobarezan, walked through the same path of old, toward his home. He walked slowly but firmly, as he was in no hurry to arrive. The day had been long, and although he was tired, the fresh air of night seemed to provide him certain vigor. It has been a good day. His sheep satisfied their hunger with the best grass he could find along the meadow, near the forest. He found many familiar faces throughout the trail who, by noticing Saleh's presence, greeted him effusively. The strange thing that night was that these people were leaving town and heading towards the forest of Gam, a dark and tragic forest. "Where are you off to?" asked Saleh to one of them. "Don't you know that in Gam lives a princess, that sings every night by her window, with a beautiful voice?" answered the man with evident enthusiasm. Saleh, thinking it over for a few seconds, decided to follow the people who entered the forest. Without knowing much, he was convinced that this could be a great adventure. He was not wrong. The prince is right by saying, "The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him." According to townspeople, the rumor is that there is no happier princess over the face of the earth than the one who sings in the castle. Saleh hurried his step, leaving some of the other townspeople behind. The curiosity of the shepherd warrior motivated the faster pace in his steps. As they moved deeper into Gam, the forest of sadness, the princess' song could be heard with greater clarity. Her voice was melodic, sublime, filled with emotion and indescribable sweetness. Saleh observed that only a handful arrived before him and found a good spot to sit relatively close to the window where the beautiful voice of the princess was heard. The curtains that covered the window didn't allow her face to be seen, and so, that night the shepherd warrior would have to settle for only the sound of her voice. A wish formed inside of Saleh. He had to meet the princess. Suddenly, the moonlight starts destroying the darkness of night in Gam, penetrating the dark clouds and filling the landscape with a ray of light, as if it was a sun-filled day. Silently, each of the townspeople started to settle, sitting in boulders, and others lay in the grass as they listened spellbound, the prince's sweet voice. Some on them didn't notice that they were in the presence of the moon and the stars for the first time in their lives. She sings, "We cannot change the past, but we can establish a future according to what he decreed before the foundation of the world. Why would we kill one another, for what we cannot change? Only God Almighty is capable of all." The beauty in her voice and the deepness in her song cause even the forest creatures to keep quiet, but the most important thing is that her song brings pleasure and serenity to the hearts of the townspeople. From time to time, a dim light coming from the castle's bedroom illuminated the prince's silhouette. However, she refused to show herself, so much so, that Saleh tried to find a way to meet the princess face to face. Suddenly, to the disappointment of all who were present, the princess' song ceases, as the night was old. She turned off her candlestick and retired for the night. The townspeople were forced to return home. An excited Saleh walked back home. He found himself needing to find a way to meet the princess personally. And so, for many nights, after a day's work, he would return to hear the princess singing. Her singing is romantic, but deep inside there is a touch of melancholy, sadness and pain. Those who hear the princess singing can't discern the feelings that seize the depths of her heart. Only Saleh can perceive that in the princess' beautiful songs lie terrible pain. One night, Saleh dared to leave a message in the castle's window. In it, he begged her to allow him to see her face to face. As a result, the opposite occurred, as the princess vanished. Many days and nights pass by and the princess' song stops being heard in the forest. Each night, many assist to hear her sweet voice, however, the princess doesn't come to the window to sing. Only Saleh, the shepherd warrior, realizes that the moon does not shine in that dark forest. For all who live in darkness, the absence of light is not important, because light, as well as the truth, hurts them. Despite her absence, Saleh returns to leave a message by the window each night, with hopes that the princess will read them. Silence. Only silence. Silence and darkness. 10. Gozisht. Crouched between the shadows are two demons, Dard and Afzordagi. They look at Saleh's reaction attentively, who is the only one who has remained by the window to wait for the princess. Dard is an evil spirit who provokes pain. He is skinny and malnourished but possesses the thirst for blood of a leech. He feeds on people's dreams. Age, gender, social status and religion are not of importance to him. First, he throws his poisonous darts, injuring, weakening and sickening his victims. Then, he allows Afzordagi, a spirit of discouragement, to finish the job, bringing heavy influences of depression to the victim. Together, like pain and depression, they are powerful allies who later invite the spirit of suicide to enter the scene in the lives of even the strongest of men. Both demons sway around nervously, trying to comprehend why two celestial beings are protecting such an insignificant mortal below the castle. Dard and Afzordagi know they have been discovered. These beings of light have discovered their precise location, but both demons know they will not be attacked unless the angels receive specific orders from their superiors. Inside Saleh's heart, begins to form a sense of anguish and worry for the princess' life. Saleh senses that grave danger is upon her, for which the shepherd warrior is prepared to confront in order to rescue her safely and soundly. It appears no one is home. He listens attentively, trying to pick up on any noise inside the castle walls, but there is only fatal silence. Saleh decides to climb the castle, slowly and carefully as to avoid slipping. The demons, like mischievous children, approach Saleh with the diabolical intention of causing him to fall, but they hear the sound of swords and decide to keep a distance with a profound hope, almost praying to God that Saleh will fall to his death. Saleh reaches the tower and heads toward the castle's entrance. Between the silence, he could almost feel death itself. The shepherd warrior's spirit screams that there conspires a diabolical plan to destroy the princess and that perhaps he could die in the process of trying to save her. Gripping his sword firmly, he walks down the stairs silently, sensing a danger totally unknown to him. He couldn't avoid a cold sweat from running all over his body. Knowing that he was exposing himself, he arms himself with determination, grabs a torch and lights it. As he descends deeper into the castle of Gam, darkness becomes denser. Darkness seems to resist being penetrated by light, but slowly begins to give in. The shepherd warrior, armed with the sword of justice, keeps descending until he reaches the lowest parts of the castle, where the dungeons are. Little by little, as he keeps going down the stairs, his mind is occupied with memories of the past. Somehow, Saleh feels as though he has been there before. Terrible memories begin to dance around his memories. Guilt, condemnation, pain and anguish arise like ghosts in the corners of his soul. In Saleh's mind, a soft whisper is heard. Therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. It was then that an invisible helmet formed around Saleh's head. Thousands of thoughts of guilt and condemnation begin to rebound. Saleh's soul once again finds peace, recovering his courage. Rotten and nauseous smells come off a big room full of jail cells. Intuitively, Saleh walks towards one of the cells. Feeling a punch over his face, The humid and hot vapor forced him to resist breathing the rotten smell that turns off the fire, lighting up the torch, leaving Saleh in total darkness. Saleh feels the presence of something malevolent that freezes his blood immediately, and so, by feeling this presence, the guardian dragon turns his head violently, sniffing towards the shepherd's direction and letting out a furious glare. A sharp and deafening squeal leaves the dragon's mouth, vomiting a river of lava, as well as a green and bitter liquid, that the shepherd warrior can only avoid by jumping high up, more due to his fear than his agility. It is said that the dragon is named Gosisht, whose mouth vomits rage and bitterness at the same time. If the fire was to reach its victims, they would turn angry and bitter, even towards their most beloved. If the victim is splattered with the liquid, he can die consumed in bitterness and in the most absolute solitude, infecting others, unless he is washed with the water of life immediately. Saleh remembers the words of the prince. See it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Saleh falls to the floor facing up, dropping his sword. The shepherd warrior can see before his very eyes a semi-transparent shield forming almost magically. Time and time again, rivers of fire and liquid sprout from the dragon's mouth but are repelled by the shield of faith. The powerful opponent refuses to give Saleh a single second to rest so he can get up from the floor. Now, it is time for the counter-attack. Any way he can manage, Saleh gets back on foot rapidly, takes his sword and starts attacking the dragon, hitting its chest, an impenetrable armor that seems to be made of steel. The dragon's eyes sparkle with fury while from his snout runs poisonous saliva and almost at the same time a puff of fire, sulfur and smoke over the shepherd warrior's shield. But in that coming day, no weapon turned against you will succeed. You will silence every voice raised up to accuse you. These benefits are enjoyed by the servants of the Lord, their vindication will come from me. I, the Lord, have spoken. The battle is intense. The fire issued by the dragon helps Saleh see where his enemy is moving. And so, the warrior sinks his sword in one of the dragon's eyes, who is now squealing sharply in pain and despair. However, Gosisht the dragon does not stop his assault against the distressed shepherd, who is not only fighting for victory, by his own life as well. Saleh notices that the more he fears, the smaller the shield turns. The shepherd had heard once before, that in similar battles, an invisible but powerful shield appears to provide protection in those types of combats. That's it. He needs to keep believing in what the prince told him. Saleh begins to pray, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." Gosisht spits darts of fire onto Saleh, and had it not been for the shield of justice that protects his chest and the helmet of salvation that protects his head, the shepherd warrior would have fallen easily to his death. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Someone had to die that night, and Saleh could not be included in the plans of that infernal beast. Knowing this gives the shepherd enough courage to regain strength and fight with more might against his powerful enemy. The shepherd warrior, once again sinks his sword down to the handle in the other eye, injuring Gosisht very close to its brain. Even so, the enormous beast continues to attack Saleh with more dangerous and uncontrollable thrusts. Tired, injured, blinded and very little strength left, the dragon sniffs to find Saleh, hoping to utilize his tail to knock this intruder down, who moves rapidly trying to find the cell where his precious captive soul hides, the princess. Saleh looks at every cell, one by one. When he finally found the cell where the princess hid, he notices that there is no lock, meaning the cell must be opened from the inside. The princess, who was standing in shivers, observing the fight from a small window, backed away in fear when she saw the shepherd warrior approaching. Saleh saw that the princess carried a key in her hands, the key that would open her own cell. However, fear had filled her heart. "Princess, I'm Saleh, a mobarezan of Noor. I have come to your rescue, please, open the door, your majesty," yelled the shepherd while waving his sword, looking out for any attacks from the dying dragon. "I'm scared. I don't know you. I'd rather die here. Leave," cried the princess, while holding in the key of hope in her hands. Saleh remembers. and have mercy on those who waver. Save others by snatching thee out of the fire, have mercy on others, coupled with a fear of God, hating even the clothes stained by the flesh. The dying dragon continues to sniff for his adversary. He nears the cell, behind Saleh's back, who has not yet noticed the danger that is upon him. A fraction of a second is enough for Saleh, in an act of valor, to fatally injure the dragon Gozisht, who had enslaved the princess. The dragon is not dead, however, it can't do any more damage. Once again, the tired shepherd nears the cell that remains locked from the inside. His hands grip the window of the cell that keeps Princess Shahzaid imprisoned. Saleh tries to free the princess with his own hands and due to the enormous effort, hurts his hands and fails to open the cell. She has the one key in her hands. The key of hope. The key of new beginnings. Conscious that only the princess can open the cell, saddened and with bloody hands, the shepherd takes his sword and his shield and starts walking up the stairs, on his way back out. The dragon is no longer a threat. The dragon has ceased, but there rose a monster that only the princess can defeat, the fear to new beginnings. Saleh abandons the castle and returns home. He was not defeated, but did not succeed, and that is the most painful part of any battle. After that night, the townspeople stopped going to the castle. There is no light incoming from the princess' bedroom window. It looks dark. There is no moon shining above the forest. Even so, the shepherd waits by Shahzaid's window each night, waiting to hear her sweet voice. 11. Shahzaid. Tariqi was a clever man. It was only a matter of months before he figured out where his wife was hiding. After much investigation and gathering witnesses, he came to the conclusion that Shahzaid was hiding in Gam's castle. A castle that Shahzaid's parents abandoned many years ago. Tariqi was a master of deception. It was not difficult for him to deceive Shahzaid. It was obvious that the princess still loved him, despite everything that happened. Once again, and knowing the risk of being killed by her husband, Shahzaid decides to return by his side. Obviously, things would go from bad to worst. Shahzaid was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her brother died in a battle against the Kingdom of Bad. Her sister had contracted a terminal illness and died very young, childless. Shahzaid and her parents had to face the pain that came from the loss of their loved ones. Shahzaid lived in the castle, overprotected by her parents out of fear of losing her as well. She grew up with very little friends, never leaving the castle walls after a group of children mocked her for her phobia of insects. For those children, her phobia was ridiculous, but Shahzaid's parents understood her and decided that her visitors could go play inside the castle, if so they wished. Her parents loved each other very much. Shahzaid was still a young girl when her mother fell victim to cancer, the same illness that would take her sister away soon after. Childhood memories were very limited for Shahzaid, dark walls, short visits in the castle's garden due to fear of insects and other random things. She never enjoyed her childhood like a normal girl should. Her only friends had parted from her because of her constant fears, which were sometimes misinterpreted as whims, manias and even insanity. When her adolescence passed, she met Tariqi, a perverse man who had introduced himself quietly to the castle with the purpose of not only winning Shahzaid's heart, but later killing her and the king as well, with the ends of taking over the throne and the riches that being a king had to offer. My sweet Shahzaid, he is not a good man. He is only after your inheritance, and may even rid himself of you, to keep the kingdom all to himself or and her father. But, father, I love Tariqi and will not allow you to come between us. You are only afraid to be alone. You will see that he will love me truly, and we will be happy, answered Shahzaid. The king ceded to her only child's words out of love and out of fear that she would commit more foolish deeds. Shahzaid and Tariqi were married, and days later, she was convinced that her father's suspicions had some truth to them. The purpose of marriage is for the wife to satisfy the man's sexual desires and to bring children into the world, Tariqi told Shahzaid, and with that, her hopes of finding happiness fell apart. She never found love by Tariqi's side and frequently found herself bleeding, hurt, after having sexual relationships with him. Tariqi's goal remained the same, killing his wife legally. Even so, Shahzaid was strong, despite being diagnosed with a weak heart. Her father started to notice Shahzade's saddened eyes, who refused to confess the abuse and suffering she was enduring from Tariqi, so that her father wouldn't worry more than he already was. As time passed, a woman became present in the lives of Shahzade and Tariqi. Say was a beautiful woman. Her skin was pale, her hair blonde, her eyes green and her body sculpted. But she was a wicked and sinister woman. Say was a distant cousin who had lost all contact with Tariqi's family and by the twists and turns of fate, had reunited with them. And so, little by little, Say gained Shahzade's trust, to the delight of her husband. Only 1 week went by and Shahzade began to suspect that Tariqi and Say were engaging sexually. Such suspicions, she could not prove. One afternoon, Say visited the castle and brought a bottle of red wine, for no specific occasion. Tariqi came back early that day, and while Shahzade stood from her seat to serve dessert, Say moved her hands quickly, emptying the contents of a small glass jar into Shahzade's wine cup, under the approving and satanic glance of Tariqi. As she returned, Shahzade's cup was ready. She absorbed her first sip, however, the princess detected a different flavor in it. She stood quickly, wanting to run to the bathroom to vomit, but Tariqi and Say took her by the hands and forced her to drink some more. In that instant, Marjan entered the room unannounced, frustrating Tariqi and Say's plans. Princess Marjan was of medium height and athletic complexion, although with her feminine lines well established, she dressed in a blue tunic with a multicolored embroidery. On her left side, she carried a very sharp sword with gold and silver inlays in the handle. Her beautiful, oval-shaped face, regular nose and lips, as well as her perfect white teeth, resemble the legendary Greek muses. Her eyes are as black and intensely bright as her long hair. Marjan didn't even listen to the excuses spoken by Tariqi and Say before what she just witnessed. She focused on catering to Shahzade, who was lying on the floor, crying and trying to spit the rest of the strange substance that she was forced to swallow. Marjan dragged Shahzade to the bathroom and called a doctor immediately, fearing that Shahzade had been poisoned, but there was not enough time to wait for a doctor. Perhaps, if the one in need had been a man, the doctor and the royal guards would arrive earlier, but this was just a woman. After all, what are women in this invaded kingdom? It doesn't matter if they are commoners or royalty, they are only women. That is why, more than ever, Marjan fought against the regime of ignorance, fear and repression that reigned in her environment. She had learned that there are neither slaves nor free men, that there are no differences between men and women, because they are all one in Christ Jesus. The problem with it was that this truth was being stopped at all cost by those who dominated the Kingdom of Noor. Marjan fought for this and many other causes. Shahzade found herself complaining about a terrible headache, meanwhile Tariqi and Say shared malicious grins. The poison was in action. Princess Marjan noticed the evil stares of both lovers and could hardly believe the extent of evil that she had witnessed against Shahzade. Marjan, putting forth much effort, assisted Shahzade to go up to her carriage, as Say and her lover watched devilishly and mockingly. Marjan kept her eyes fixed forward, trying to maneuver the carriage as fast as she could towards her kingdom. Her black hair curled and her beautiful face vigorously, bathed in thick tears of desperation and rage. As she drove, she remembered, holding on to the prince's promise. They will pick up snakes with their hands, and whatever poison they drink will not harm them. They will place their hands on the sick and they will be well. Princesses Marjan and Kimia had been two of the few friends that visited Shahzade, for they were not forced friendships. They loved her and maintained a faithful relationship with Shahzade, despite disagreeing with her premature decisions. Both princesses had been witnesses to the childhood misfortunes of that weak and fearful princess, staying by her side, even when Marjan and Kimia were exposed to the criticism of the royal. Even more, they stayed by her side trying to persuade not to become acquainted with the likes of Tariqi. However, they respected her decision. How many crucial decisions are made because of solitude, ignoring that in the remaining parts of life, solitude can intensify to the point that it gets more than unbearable, despite being in company. 12. A dark night. The princess continued the journey to her kingdom with moderate pace, ignoring that Dard the demon nailed his sharp arrows in Shahzade's head. Marjan prayed in silence for her beloved friend's life. The princesses arrived in the city of Makane Sal, a place of peace where Shahzade could rest and be safe, under the care of her faithful friends. Kimia, knowing her sister, immediately noticed the worry in Marjan's face, who brought her up to speed about the events that had taken place. The servants took care of the carriage while two of the best doctors were being called with urgency. Kimia was a bit taller than her sister Marjan. Her hair was brown and straight and reached a little below the shoulders. Her look was profound, which inspired an air of respect. Her eyes were big and possessed a dark brown color. Her sharp face and slender figure indicated excellent physical condition, which was due to the training and constant combats with her sword. Kimia acquired her knowledge from her father and the analytical instincts from her mother. Both combinations had exposed the perverse plans of the evil lords of Bad, for which Kimia was considered a well-respected rival. With an almost maternal love, she cared for her beloved sister Marjan, who was 4 years younger than her. Kimia strove, not only to teach Marjan all that is related with the art of war but above all, she taught her with her own example, because knowledge and wisdom, along with a good example, forge the firm character of any disciple. Kimia meditated about the recent events. Shahzade must live. Or at least she has to be conscious of the danger that surrounds her. It would be suicide if she doesn't resign on Tariqi, said Kimia. We must prevent Shahzade from returning to Gam at all costs. She was under the influence of Say and it's possible that she could become easy prey for Tariqi, and he won't doubt killing her, affirmed Marjan. The sisters walked to the living room. There was no reason for concern to take control of the situation or their appetite. They both knew that physical strength was also necessary, before, during and after each battle. Kimia remembered aloud. Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, in every situation through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, tell your requests to God. By Kimia's orders, nobody was allowed to discuss sensitive issues before a meal. That was a law in her kingdom. The doctors waited for the princesses to finish their meals to give them the report on Shahzade's health. Highnesses, began the oldest of the doctors, Princess Shahzade has ingested a poison that could have ended her life. Although she didn't die, we believe the damage is irreversible. She will live with constant headaches for a long time, until the poison leaves her body completely. There is an ambiguity we can't comprehend, signaled the youngest doctor. Her heart is very weak but her physical strength is astonishingly admirable. That means she is weak and strong at the same time. We hope she decides to live, added Kimia. The will to live is what can make the difference between life and death. Without it, her life would be much more tragic than death itself. Both doctors bowed to the princesses and left. Kimia and Marjan both decided it was time to rest after bathing. The emotions of that day had run high and they needed to recover their strength. They went to bed and fell asleep. They never had nightmares, except for that night, demons dancing about Shahzade, stabbing daggers and arrows all over her body, while the princess agonized from all the pain, trying to run away desperately, but as she ran, she wrapped chains around her neck and sank more daggers in her body, allowing the demons to torture her with pleasure. Not far away from Shahzade, in a dark area, Tariqi and Say were performing a summoning in demonic tongue, surrounded by thick black fog, peeling of skin with sharp knives and tossing it over human bones and strange symbols drawn in the floor of a big room. That night, powerful celestial warriors had received the order not to intervene in that mental battle, allowing that nightmares to be witnesses by both princesses. Certain dreams are instructions for us to understand what is happening in the spiritual realm, and invest prayer in someone's favor, explained the prince to Kimia and Marjan in their dreams. The demonic influences danced freely around the angels of light, mocking them while other demons tortured Shahzade. Even in separate dreams, Kimia and Marjan prayed for their beloved friend Shahzade. It was a real dream. Very real. In Shahzade's bedroom, heavy demonic influences mounted their theatrical act of terror and deceit. Nobody loves you, Shahzade. Don't lie to yourself, you are garbage and a failure. What your friends feel for you is pity. You've failed them many times. You are not even a complete woman. You don't know this, but you are infertile. Infertile," whispered Tokai, the demon of bitterness. Shahzaid started to cry in the middle of the dark, almost impalpable night and was able to recognize the bedroom that Kimia and Marjan had gifted to her inside their castle, many years ago, making her feel like part of their family. Her heart was aching. Dard was performing his job with excellence, while the demons, Afzordigi and Tokai, fawned at him. Shahzaid remembered what Tariki and Say had done. Tokai approached the princess silently, spreading mist of bitterness. Afzordigi wanted to join the party against the princess, but Shahzaid's guardian angel stopped that from happening, as he swung his sword toward Afzordigi's face, trimming 2 hairs from his beard. "You woke up in a bad mood today, dear Redalot," said Afzordigi with a mocking grin, but with evident panic in his face. "My humor almost never changes, but I would be much happier if I was given permission to cut your throat, my dear demon," smiled Redalot with feigned kindness. Shahzaid was not part of the conversation between these two beings from the spiritual realm, ignoring that both sides battled, disputing her life. The time would come for the 3 demons to attack at once. The pain was unbearable for her. Her head, heart, the memories. The best next thing was death. Tokai smiled when his best friend became present. The party was coming alive. The princess would soon succumb to the attacks of the 4 demonic beings, but a stare of disapproval from the Celestial warrior broke off the intervention of the newly arrived demon. 13. The lesson. Marjan wept in frustration, anger and impotence. Kimia entered the dining area and there, she saw her faithful partner in tears, with her head buried under her hands. Marjan heard Kimia's steps and said, "Shahzaid left. She ran away. This morning, the servants saw her when they made their way to the well of water of life." "No. She didn't run away. She wasn't captive here," corrected Kimia. "She just left. She is trying to escape, but no one can run away from themselves. People who try to run are really trying to avoid the responsibility of facing themselves and correcting what needs to be changed. But I saved her from Tariki and Say. I brought her to a safe place. I simply can't understand why she left. We are giving her protection and love," added a saddened Marjan. "There are personal influences of people and of the demonic that bind us due to our own lack of discipline. Sometimes, people prefer to live enslaved to certain things or situations, even if that causes profound pain." Kimia paused briefly, reassuring that Marjan understood this valuable lesson. The habit of being under an apparent protection or an apparent comfort, once they are free, makes them feel insecure. Freedom becomes uncomfortable and they fall easily into debauchery, because they don't know the limits of their own freedom. Once they exceed the limits of that freedom, they become slaves of something or someone. Marjan nodded in silence. Kimia was right and Marjan needed to hear more. "As our prince told us, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, rather, serve one another humbly in love." Marjan was receiving a lesson that would serve her for the rest of her life, and that most likely, she would not hear coming from the lips of another. So, remember that demons take possession of the ground that each individual person allows them to take, by exceeding certain limits. Shahzaid must confront her past, in order to fix her present and to live a future with freedom. You and I can help her, however, we can't make decisions for her or take on her own responsibilities, added the princess. "But, Kimia," Marjan objected softly, "she can die." "I understand your worries, dear sister," answered Kimia tenderly, hugging her. "Your mortality isn't negotiable, until you finish each and every one of the purposes that heaven has designed for you. Therein lies part of the sovereignty of God. Your steps through life are arranged from before the foundation of the world." The Book of the Prince states, "My bones were not hidden from you, when I was made in secret and sewed together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me when I was inside the womb. All the days ordained for me were recorded in your scroll before one of them came into existence." Marjan's beautiful eyes took on a new spark, as if an invisible bandage had fallen. It's true. Sayan Tariki had the chance of killing Shahzaid and didn't do it. It was almost as if something or someone had prevented it. The emotion reflected in Marjan's beautiful face, filled Kimia with overflowing joy. Now, I understand that I arrived in the precise moment to prevent them from poisoning Shahzaid. One more minute, and it could have been much worse for her. Finished Marjan, drying her tears with a bright smile. Marjan could not see that an enormous veil was vanishing in front of the eyes of her soul. Light of truth penetrated her spirit, bringing about knowledge, understanding, wisdom and freedom. The prince had once before told them, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." She was experiencing this truth. However, there were many veils that had yet to vanish. Truth is only received with joy, by those who acknowledge the excess of their ignorance. They don't become offended when someone tries to teach them. They are not bothered when someone less traveled points out to them their mistakes, because they recognize that God has set people to help them see what they are not capable of seeing for themselves. Marjan was beginning to comprehend that ignorance goes hand in hand mostly with laziness, pride and fear of the truth. Many warriors can't tolerate some truths and prefer to be comforted by hiding in ignorance and pride. A relaxing sense of peace extended, conquering her heart little by little. Kimia smiled in satisfaction, seeing her little sister faithful, growing and treasuring the promises of the prince. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. 14. The Stain. Princess Shahzaid's hands trembled, trying to hold the key that had appeared soon after entering the old prison. Shahzaid sat by a dark corner, scared, motionless and confused, amidst loneliness and uncertainty. Her tears dried little by little. She dragged herself slowly to the door, although she had no idea what she would face by walking away from the dungeon. She inserted the key into the keyhole. The door opened, giving way to freedom, a freedom she would not know how to take in or live by. She had wished for death in many occasions before, that now, living made no sense whatsoever. The spirit of fear approached her. Meanwhile, the dragon lay between seas of dark, greenish blood, caused by the multiple cuts that came from the shepherd warrior's sword. In her chest, Shahzaid felt profound rage when looking at the dragon, that for so long held her captive in that prison. She wanted to tear apart the dead body. She punched it with her delicate hands, staining them with its blood. She spit on it, in an act of disgust, and took a dagger that she found on the floor and cut through the dragon's skin with ease, as a symbol of victory. Hanging the skin over her bare shoulder, she headed toward the exit with a weak smile on her face. Before abandoning that place, she looked back at her former captor with a sneer. She had triumphed, but the princess' eyes could not perceive the treacherous, ghostly shadow that had emerged from the dragon's dead body, reaching under the dead skin that the princess had sliced. The dragon's skin was quite heavy, hurting her shoulders, but she was not willing to stop exhibiting that trophy to the world. The princess started the hard task of ascending the stairs to get to her bedroom. As she ascended those gloomy steps, intense memories from the past came back, bringing her unknown but incredible strength. She remembered the person that held her captive. She remembered all those who never came to help her and those who betrayed her. All of them. Each one. Not by name. All of them abandoned her. Her facial expressions started to change. Her look was no longer sweet and tender, and her traits of kindness disappeared, while her determination transformed into anger, her anger into rage, and rage into hatred. She didn't know that roots of bitterness were extending inside of her, planted by the demon Tokai, inside of her fertile heart. The princess grabbed the dead skin hanging over her shoulder with both hands, squeezing it tightly, in such a way that her knuckles turned white, and her feet ascended apace, almost violently. She arrived at her bedroom, got rid of her dirty clothes and began washing her body. She spent a long time in the bathtub, remembering, meditating, without allowing her mind to rest peacefully. She noticed a dark stain in one of her shoulders and scrubbed it forcefully, adding more soap, until her skin hurt and turned red. It didn't help. The stain was still there. Shahzaid was tired. Not even the bath ceased her, so she prepared her bed to sleep. The bedroom was dark, but the princess didn't even notice. Perhaps due to the fact that the prison had been much darker and she didn't remember the amount of light that once existed in her room and her own life. She had grown so accustomed to living in the shadows, that the absence of light became indifference. Tiredness soon won her over and she fell profoundly asleep. The dim light coming from a candle made shadows in the room that resembled sinister spirits dancing to the rhythm of death? Or, were they actually spirits of the kingdom of bad? That night, in the princess' dreams, she saw how the dragon hugged her tightly, fusing with her body, becoming one with her, as if she wore a second layer of skin over her shoulders. It was a stunning tunic made of dragon skin. The multicolored dragon scales shone beautifully under the strange moonlight. There was no resting in her dream. The morning after, with the help of a mirror, the princess noticed that the stain over her shoulder had spread to the left side, becoming darker. She called the most prestigious doctor in the kingdom of Gam. The doctor assured that the stain was not dangerous. Most likely, the stain was the product of a fall and would heal with time. The doctor recalled that perhaps, the stain was similar to that of the majority of the inhabitants of the kingdom of Gam. Some weeks went by, when the princess had ordered a cape made of the skin she had torn from the dragon, and that she had worn in many of her dreams. It was her prized trophy. She had conquered the dragon and came out victorious from her battle. The princess decided to forget the good and people and concentrated in the wounds they caused her. Shahzade's heart was infected with pride and fear of the truth. One night, as she had done many nights in the past, she lit up the candlestick and opened the curtains, looking out the window. It was a little chilly, so she put on the multicolored cape over her shoulders. The moonlight reflected on the cape in a majestic manner, causing the dragon scales to shine mysteriously. Shahzade smiled. While looking out the window, she saw a poor man from a distance, waiting patiently, fixing his eyes toward the window. It looked like the man that fought with. No, that could not be the same gentleman. This one was simply a shepherd. Nobody important. No one else was there to hear her singing that night. Even so, the princess remembered the lyrics to some of her songs and started to sing. Unknowingly, as she sang, the stain over her shoulder grew more and more. Not only did the princess sing with a stronger voice, but she sang with a different spirit. She felt renovated, with strange power. As her bowels were in pain that also caused pleasure while it consumed her. The dark stain was setting a fine thread from her back and penetrating her heart. Outside of the castle, near the window, the shepherd listened to the prince's heart attentively. Tears began flowing from the eyes of that humble shepherd, as he asked himself what was the real motive of so much pain in the soul of the princess. Townspeople began to arrive slowly. After hearing the singing again, no one had noticed any change. No one questioned her absence. Everyone praised her for her beautiful songs. Only the shepherd knew that something had happened in the heart of the princess. On his way home, Saleh walked slowly, praying and crying in silence. Intense pain stabbed in the profundity of his soul, as there was no human remedy that could soothe the pain in the princess and the shepherd, with the exception of the master touch of the prince. 15 The dungeon and apparent calm flooded the castle and its surroundings. The forest went back to normal, as the prince's voice was heard again. Sitting near the window was Saleh, as usual, meditating in each word that the princess sang. It was like sowing daggers instead of flowers, in the garden of life. However, no one could appreciate what came from Shahzade's heart, except for the shepherd. One afternoon, Saleh went to the window but the princess was not there. He ran to the castle's gate, tapping it until he became tired. A great urgency swayed the shepherd's heart. The princess might be in danger. Inside the castle, the princess heard the taps on the gate, but preferred to stay where she was. She did not want to be interrupted, comforted or intruded. Shahzade's heart was infected even more by bitterness, pride and fear of the truth. She was not able to sleep the night before. Memories of the past hit her mind with persistence, while the pain was feeding her a kind of self-compassion and despise on herself. She stood and walked toward the bathtub. She took hot water, hotter than usual, adding scented oils to the tub. The scents of exotic herbs elevated and spread throughout. Removing her robe, she introduced herself calmly to the tub, until the hot water covered her shoulders, making her sweat instantly. The stain was still there. In fact, it had covered nearly her entire back, But there was not physical pain. She trusted the words of the doctor, who assured her that the stain would disappear. The water soon began to cool off. She removed herself from the tub and put on her robe again. Without much thought, she took her cape, put it over her shoulders and headed downstairs, once again, to her ancient prison. She felt a powerful force dragging her downstairs, to that miserable and depressing place. This caused her fear, anguish, anger and many other things that she had never known during her entire life. A giant shadow rose behind her back, trying to push her down the stairs. The princess stumbled, nearly falling. Had it not been for the powerful angel that accompanied her, she would have inevitably fallen. Shahzaid thought that her robe had tangled on her feet, so she lifted it slightly and kept descending the steps. A powerful shadow breathed behind her neck and gave Shahzaid goosebumps. That heightened her panic. Now she was regretting going down there, with no other protection, other than a torch. Finally, she reached the last step. Her hands shook from the nerves that she felt from revisiting that place. The torchlight still fought to penetrate the darkness. The princess' eyes identified a stain on the floor. Strangely enough, the dragon's body had disintegrated. In fact, there was only that dark stain. There was no odor, no rotten smell that would indicate a dragon's dead body. The rage she had once felt from the dragon's control over her life became a major weight on profound despise and bitterness. She walked over the stain, heading toward the small prison cell. There was only emptiness, humidity and a sense of loneliness. Her captor had been a malicious master of suffering. Not only had the dragon caused physical pain, but also heartbreak and separation from her friends and loved ones. She entered the cell. Her feet stumbled with the key of hope, which lay on the floor. She looked at it with disdain, almost with disgust, and did not pick it up. In the past, it would have been a useful key. Now, all had lost sense to her. She sat on a chair, the chair that she had sat on for so long, waiting for nothing. She contemplated her bed with sadness, the place where she had stopped dreaming. That bed had simply been the tomb of her dreams. On the dirty wall, there was a broken mirror. There, she saw her emaciated face, causing her despise. She was extremely beautiful, but today, she looked like a beat-up, weak ghost of herself. She stormed out of the cell, passing over the stain on the floor, whose color was the same as the stain on her back. The princess decided never to return to this site. Shahzaid headed to the tower, and once she arrived there, she began to sing her sad songs. The shepherd waited patiently for her to appear. Shahzaid sang with a different vigor. While the townspeople laughed, admired and applauded her singing, the shepherd was the only one who kept silence, listening to the nude heart of his princess, which flowed with immense pain. After hearing the ovations from her admirers and thanking them with apparent humility, the princess returned to bed, covering her body from head to toe with the heavy and fancy blankets. The same dreams, same nightmares tormented her sleep each night. Meanwhile, the townspeople walked back to their homes. As always, only the shepherd remained with an attitude of deep meditation. He stayed a while longer. 16. Battle in Gam. Kimia went outside of castle to breathe some fresh air, as nightfall approached. She lay on the fresh grass of the royal garden next to Marjan, who had been there for a while. The stars looked like thousands of little suns, suspended around their orbits. There was no celestial sight more breathtaking than that of Makan Sal. How right they were by calling it a place of peace. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament displays his skillful hands, whispered Kimia. The cool breeze of the afternoon played with the hairs of those noble, courageous and beautiful princesses. Marjan murmured, what made Shahzaid return to her castle? She is exposing herself to being killed by Saint Tariki. There are some who can't take advantage from their past experiences. It doesn't matter how much they suffered, they always go back to the place of their torments. They haven't realized that God gave them a special nature, a supreme position in this world, but they are incapable of treating themselves as the most valued without falling to the extremes of selfishness and human vanity. Kimia continued, every time they submit to their tormentors, they trample the dignity that God has given them, by the false image they have of the offense and of forgiveness. When we forgive someone, don't we expose ourselves to being hurt again? Asked Marjan. In the Book of the Prince, we read the story of a loyal subject, who was sworn to be king. However, He had to face death on 2 occasions because their beloved king wanted to kill him out of jealousy and envy. The subject, though faithful and forgiving, had to flee and never be in the presence of his king. Otherwise, the prophecy that had spoken about him would never have been realized. The king, although he apologized to his subject, never had a repentant heart. If there is no genuine repentance on the part of the offenders, you expose yourself to continue to suffer if you stay close to those people. Listen closely, Marjan, finished Kimia, you have to learn to forgive. That doesn't mean you have to stay with them, because those who have the power to kill you don't always have the power to resurrect you. I understand, Kimia, answered Princess Marjan thoughtfully, fixing her deep black eyes to a star. The princesses got up when they saw the glow of lightning from a distance. From afar, dark clouds, thunderbolts and tornadoes were settling in the kingdom of Gam. The wind picked up blew away dry leaves in the kingdom of Makane Saul, while the hairs swayed playfully in the heads of the princesses. Marjan, said Kimia firmly, the time to fight is near. The forces of the kingdom of Bad are gathering power to demolish our friend, Shahzaid. Marjan's eyes lit up with renewed glow. The princes would now face this battle with better understanding. Both princesses entered the castle to prepare their weapons and armor. The tempestuous wind over the forest of Gam started to destroy the surroundings near the castle where Princess Shahzaid took refuge. Moments later, Kimia and Marjan saddled their horses, directing their paths to the castle of Gam, knowing they were risking their lives by crossing through the imminent storm that fell over Gam, with the purpose of rescuing their friend. Meanwhile, on the other side, the shepherd raised his eyes to the sky. The dark clouds seemed to fall over the forest and cover it in darkness. It wasn't wise to out there. Thunderbolt lightning barely penetrated the enormous darkness, however, it was still fatal. The demons, invisible to the human eye, were dancing around Saleh. The demonic beings looked up to the sky, as if inviting a thunderbolt to crash the shepherd's head. There was no rain, only thunder and wind. A lot of wind. Thousands of dry branches and stones streaked across the air, becoming dangerous the surroundings. Had it not been for the angelical warriors that protected Saleh, he would have soon been beaten. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Prayed Saleh out loud. The angelical swords moved from one side to the other, faster than the speed of light, destroying stones, trees, branches, metal pieces and even bones of human and animal remains that could have cut through the shepherd warrior. When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Saleh moved with extreme difficulty. He lost his way for a moment, but Princesses Kimia and Marjan were still on their way, doing a good job of staying on track. He guards the paths of the just and protects those who are faithful to him. Saleh continued praying and advancing with difficulty. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet I will be confident. Saleh hears the voice of the prince whispering in his soul, I have taught you the way of wisdom, I have led you in the paths of uprightness. Saleh's eyes were opened and his feet guided towards the right path. Suddenly, a rock hit hard against the shepherd's head, falling head first to the ground. The angels were occupied fighting the storm and 3 demons took advantage by pouncing over Saleh to crush him with a huge rock while he was still unconscious. A white-blue light flashed in the dark, at the same time that a head flew through the air, falling between the other 2 demons, who stumbled on it. The demons let go of the rock and it fell on the foot of one of them, who cried like a pig from the terrible pain. The other demon, scared but safe, witnessed this act of violence and fell to the ground, twisting and crying from laughter. Saleh regained consciousness, shook his head and stood up, continuing to advance through the forest until reaching home. The angels continued to protect and guide the shepherd through the forest. Never before had it been so hard a task to reach the end of the forest. This was one diabolical night, where it seemed like every member of the Kingdom of Bad was taking part. Finally, Saleh left the forest. From that point on, the way home was less difficult, but the tornado winds coming from the Kingdom of Gam made its surroundings sway violently. When he arrived home, he lit up a candle and went to bed exhausted. His spirit was anguished. Something sinister was taking place that night. The attack wasn't against him or his people. The attack was against Princess Shahzaid. What strategy would the prince come up with if he was in Saleh's place? Kimia and Marjan had fought the same battle as Saleh, but neither the shepherd nor the princesses knew it. In the meantime, Shahzaid, bored from solitude and with a headache, took the book, opening it at random. Saleh felt the impulse to get up from bed and started reading the book for a while, searching for instructions from the prince. They both read, "Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." Saleh's eyes caught a sudden flash. There, hanging on the wall, was the shining sword that had slain the dragon. The princess searched for a comfortable position on her favorite sofa and continued reading. "For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." Saleh stood from the chair and grabbed his sword, taking it off the sheath to sharpen it. Perhaps it will need to be used soon. Shahzaid meditated on the words in the book. "Therefore take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm." Saleh took a rock and started sharpening the sword. The dragon's shadow twisted painfully. The shepherd sharpened the sword with intensity, while Princesses Kimia and Marjan neared Gam. "Therefore take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm," meditated Saleh. The dragon's stain was slowly vanishing from the princess' back. "Stand therefore, and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness." "Of course, the truth," whispered Saleh. The princess must be being deceived. The thread of poison that crossed Shahzaid's heart shook violently. The shepherd carried on with the sharpening of his sword while a ray of light started healing each corner of his hurting heart. Shahzaid received more truth. "Take the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." Obviously, Shahzaid had been deceived by the tradition and customs of corrupt men, who for many ages had imposed them to men and women from her kingdom. Unwritten laws had been passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, establishing limits and prohibitions to women, as if they were only sexual objects. Shahzaid and many other women had been hurt by heartbreak and betrayal. Shahzaid was beginning to comprehend that God created women, including her, as a special being and not as man's slaves. She was beginning to understand that God loved her, and that type of love leaves no room for fear, because perfect love expels all fear. Light began to cover the shadows. Saleh continued, with obsession and enthusiasm, to sharpen his precious sword, while Kimia and Marjan neared Gam. The dragon's shadow was being consumed by very bright halo of light. At the same time, inside the castle of Gam, Shahzaid felt relief in her soul, having the sensation of light away over her shoulders. The light of truth continued penetrating Shahzaid's mind, as the spiritual veils of darkness fell one by one. Besides all these, taking the shield of faith, with which you can quench all the flaming darts of the evil one. Shahzaid rapidly untied the dragon cape, feeling that she could breathe for the first time in a long time. Her heart strengthened in such a way that she began to sing. "I waited patiently for the Lord, he inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon the rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear, and put their trust in the Lord." Her song was beautiful. Freedom, joy, full of life. She stood up, took the cape and ran downstairs, tossing the cape in her old prison cell. She picked up the key of hope and left the cell, closing its doors violently, promising to herself to never open it again. A door which only opened from the inside. Nothing or no one could open the door, ever again. Not even her. She swore it. Light entered, burning the last fragments of the stain that had been embodied on the floor, from what was left of the dragon's dead body. The princess ascended the stairs with renewed strength without noticing that two powerful angels followed her with their swords covered in greenish blood, from the battle against the dragon's spirit. When she reached her bedroom, the princess opened her windows fully, allowing moonlight to penetrate each corner of that place. Something else was taking place that the human eye could not perceive. The princess' heart was filled with light, for which radiated the entire room. Her heart was being restored and filling with new life. For the first time in some time, the princess slept with ease. No shadows, no fear, no sadness, and with the certainty of a new life and a new song. That night life itself had defeated the powers of death. Meanwhile, the shepherd finished the hard labor of sharpening his sword. He was tired but felt happy on the inside, as if he had liberated himself from a battle from which he had come out victorious. With that in mind, he went to bed, where he kneeled to pray for the princess, his soul and his mind, putting all in the hands of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Kimia and Marjan arrived at the castle of Gam, late at night. Shahzaid opened the door to let them in, even before they knocked. After all, she had seen two horses from afar. It couldn't have been anyone else but them, her kind and beloved friends. The three embraced each other. They were glad to be together once again. There was much to talk about. The same battle. Two princesses and a shepherd that had not met had won a dispute for a soul that swayed between life and death, past and present. In the castle, Shahzaid, Kimia and Marjan spent the night talking about their experiences since the departure from Makhain Saul. 17. Milikulia. After spending a few days with Shahzaid, Kimia and Marjan had to return to their castle. The time of learning had almost reached its end for the princess. Now, she had to apply the teachings of the experimented Kimia. It wasn't the same to receive instructions than to receive understanding. It wasn't the same to receive understanding that to have the wisdom to apply the received teachings. Herein lies all the difference in the teachings, which for centuries has spread in the Kingdom of Noor. There are those who have all the information, all light necessary to be free, but never dare to apply it in their everyday lives, settling for living in a dark and mediocre environment. In some corners of Shahzaid's heart, there was still much pride, which stopped her from receiving the truth with joy. The prince had warned. Who cuts off the spirit of princes, who inspires fear in the kings of the earth? One who secretly slanders a neighbor I will destroy. A haughty look and an arrogant heart I will not tolerate. It was obvious that she still had to face the fire. The type of fire that humbles and breaks the arrogant ways of men. That type of pride that all deny possessing but is the best kept treasure and contains the least wealth. Pride goes before destruction and arrogance before a fall. The test of fire works well where human resistance sets limits, or where it forges a person's character or is discarded for lack of resilience. Many weeks passed, without change in sight. Shahzaid hired servants, on the advice of Kimia. Of course, the servants had to be discreet and of absolute confidence. All seemed to go back to normal in the castle. The type of normal that makes people fall into a kind of doze, which creates a suitable atmosphere to fall into the conformity of mediocrity. However, in the supernatural spheres, there is never time to rest. War is constant, to death. The kingdom of bad is always on the lookout for victims. From innocent babies to the most perverse of people. Motam will never be able to cease his thirst of vengeance against the Prince of Noor. He hates anything related to justice and honor. He detests each man and woman of Noor. Something infernal would be planned at night, in the very heart of hell. There are spirits from the past that never want to lose the opportunity to haunt us again. The spirit of the dragon Gozisht, embarrassed and wrathful, returned to the kingdom of darkness, surrounded by taunts and boisterous laughter from his colleagues of darkness. The proud dragon wanted to go unnoticed through that row of horrible warriors, who laughed derisively at him, because of the ridiculous defeat he had suffered at the hands of a miserable shepherd. Gozisht's look of hatred immediately silenced the laughter of these little demons, which fled in terror before his presence. The Prince of Darkness, Motam, waited for the impotent defeated spirit of Gozisht impatiently in his throne. When Gozisht stood before his prince, Motam took his sword and amputated one of its many arms, which dripped in foul, dark green liquid. Before this action, there was a general rejoicing of contempt, bitterness and revenge. The dragon bared the pain of the amputation. Arrogance and hatred made him hide his pain. The spirit of vengeance towards the princess empowered his hopes of soon being recognized before all those demons. He had forged a foolproof plan that would make every one of those stupid spirits kneel before him. He swore it to himself. Then they would know who Gozisht was. Then, Motam, Prince of Darkness, directed his gaze to the three demons that had bothered Shahzaid for a long time. He nodded, approving the start of the next plan, outlining a demonic smile. "One more thing," added Motam with bitterness. "The King of Kings has ordered that Princess Shahzaid be kept alive. You can make her life miserable, destroy her faith even. But you can't kill her." Thousands of demons booed the celestial orders, but those were orders that had to be followed thoroughly. Demons understand that divine authority can never be overthrown, no matter how much power they possess. Dard, one of the demons, prepared darts bigger than pain. The idea was to give the princess the most intense headaches, and with that, consume her into the most terrible of depressions. Afzordagi, the demon of depression, smiled pleasantly, as he sharpened his acute dagger, which he would insert into the heat of his victim. Another demon, this one of beautiful and elegant presence, appeared onto the scene. He grabbed his weapon. It was a very common weapon. The two other demons despised their third colleague, mocking him. "Oh, no. I'm so scared, Afzordagi. I don't think you and I will get a chance to use our powerful weapons against Shahzaid," mocked Dard. The third demon showed no signs of anger toward the mockery, as he tucked his deadly weapon inside its spotless case while smiling. "Silence, you fool!" yelled the Prince of Bad. "That is the order and you will do your job. Now, get out." The demonic trio headed to the castle of Gam, waiting for the opportunity to attack their victim. Each demon would attack Shahzaid without waiting for their turn. The attack would be one-on-one or all against one. The important thing was to make her suffer without killing her. They had orders, very specific orders, to make the princess give up on life as soon as possible. Past victims had fallen to the attacks, though less furious than this one, but for some strange reason Princess Shahzaid was stronger than past victims. In the middle of the night, the dark forces moved nervously. When they neared the castle, they saw angelical guardians armed with splendid swords. Their faces showed the determination to defend the princess at any cost. Shahzaid was receiving external help and that was not supposed to be in the plan. However, Motam had foreseen this and had Plan B figured out, and it was just as sinister, to weaken the warriors of the Kingdom of Noor as well as the guardian angels. It was not a new plan, but it had worked for Motam thousands of times throughout human history. Motam leaned over and stroked his beardless chin, smiled wickedly as thousands of demons spread throughout the Kingdom of Noor. He had ordered that the spirits of indifference subtly disperse among the warriors of light. Normally, these spirits did not carry deadly weapons, but were accompanied by spirits that provoked drowsiness, lack of interest, overconfidence, laziness or despair, but usually these were spirits that no one noticed. They began to influence the weaker people, who were responsible for transmitting the same feeling of indifference to the stronger ones. Soon after, all were contaminated and started to lose grip on their main goals and dreams, settling for second-hand aspirations. The brother spirits of Tokai also did their job promptly. Bitterness was infecting, running rapidly, gaining ground through pride persons, the gossipy, sad as well as the dreamless. Bitterness, despair and indifference made warriors of light weak to the point of surrender. No one was conscious of what was taking place in the spiritual realm. No one noticed the wave of sleep and heaviness that passed through the Kingdom of Noor. Soon, the warriors of light dropped their weapons, having no desire to keep fighting. Angelic warriors were also starting to feel weak, retiring from their positions, leaving the princess vulnerable to attacks. Only 2 or 3 other warriors, aside from Kimia, Marjan and Saleh, remained faithfully, because indifference and apathy had taken possession of the rest. Some angels returned to their celestial spheres to regain the necessary strength and to continue to protect the princess. Danha, the Lord of Solitude, infiltrated the castle to persuade the princess to return to her cell. Shahzaid, out of curiosity, decided to go down to the dungeon. She only wanted to see what happened to the dragon's body. As Shahzaid meditated in her heart, she ignored that her own wish was weakening her courageous guardian warriors. Danha wrapped his threads around Shahzaid. The thought was gaining strength in the mind of the princess. Meanwhile, outside, the other demons savagely faced off against the already decimated celestial guardians. The princess found herself descending the stairs, going to the cell once again. The cell remained closed, cold and dark. There, Afzordigi inserted the dagger into her heart, while Dard placed darts on her head. Shahzaid felt exhausted, weeping, stricken with grief, while the demons drilled her ears with mocking laughter. Both demons reached for her ears and laughter, causing sharper and more intense pain. Shahzaid dragged herself up the stairs, barely reaching her bedroom. The pain was unbearable. She went to bed, teary-eyed, wishing only to rest. She called one of her servants and ordered him to bring musicians to her. The servant did just that. The musicians quickly got in position in the room next to the royal bedroom. A signal was given, and the musicians began to play their instruments softly. As the music played, Milikhulia, the third demon, emerged from the shadows. With a look of disdain, his eyebrow arched in pride and started to take this instrument of death. With patience and slowness, he tightened the ropes and prepared to strike the first blow. One after the other, his cords penetrated the princess' heart, making her wish for death, above all else in this world. It was a mixture of pain and pleasure. It was not possible for something that looked so beautiful to be consuming her that way. Almost as if that weapon was a drug that was driving her towards suicide and depression. Shahzaid ordered the musicians to keep playing for her while she tried to sleep. Dard and Afzordigi hugged and danced like two people in love, not knowing that Marg, the spirit of death, was slowly approaching. There was no rush. Marg loved to do things slowly because he knew that his powers were invincible. Marg contemplated the ridiculous act of Dard and Afzordigi from a distance and smiled scornfully. After all, that night, the hosts of darkness would celebrate the defeat of one of the fiercest opponents of the Kingdom of Darkness. Meanwhile, in bed, Shahzaid's barely audible desperate cry awoke the shepherd's heart in anguish. 18. In the River of Death. The spirits of indifference had managed to calm the senses of the shepherd, but that night, those were torn impetuously from his head. Light makes everything visible, which is why the book says, "Sleeper, awake. Rise from the dead and Christ will shine on you." Saleh heard this in his ear. The sword of a mighty angel had cut out demons by their roots, leaving the invisible arm of one of them hanging from the ears of the shepherd. Instinctively, the shepherd shook it with his hand, thinking it was an insect. Even amid the darkness, the eyes of the shepherd could not notice the light radiating from the sword of the mighty angel standing before him. In the middle of the night, Saleh dressed hastily. Something was terribly wrong. Although he could not quite figure out what it was better to sneak by the castle. It was very likely that the princess was in great danger. On the way to the castle, he asked himself, how and when he had fallen into indifference. The spirit of condemnation walked near him, ready to take every opportunity to control the mind of the shepherd. "The prince has freed me from all types of condemnation," Saleh said to himself in a low voice, and so, a bright and accurate sword thrust ended with the spirit of condemnation, splitting it into two pieces. He quickened his pace and soon reached the castle. The doors of the castle were closed and locked from the inside, as well as the windows. There was no way to climb up, so he took on knocking on the door, punching it until it opened. The princess heard the knocks but had asked her servants to leave her alone for a few days. How importunate! A sense of rage invaded her suddenly, perhaps from the aching heart and head. She took a bow, some arrows and darts, aiming them towards the person who was interrupting her sleep. Shahzaid had fallen under the influence of Tanufur, the spirit of hatred. This demon blinded any sense of love and made its victims forget the good things that people and other loved ones had done for them. Tanufur screamed hysterically in the ears of Shahzaid. "Kill him. You are alive because of him. Kill him. Destroy him." The shepherd could not comprehend what was happening. Despite having identified himself, Shahzaid kept throwing the darts his way, blinded by the fury that grew in her heart. Dart and Afzordigi smiled in satisfaction, while Malik Hulia continued destroying the prince's heart with his formidable instrument of death. There was no doubt that this demon knew how to do his job. Now, the demons were impressed with his job, even though they actually wished for him to fail when it was his turn to attack. Tanafer continued to scream into Shahzaid as the other demons worked together to do their jobs. In the kingdom of darkness a certain order is followed, but never unity. If laughter exists in the kingdom of bad, it is laughter full of bitterness and sarcasm, but never of joy. Their laughter was even louder when Saleh was struck by 2 darts that the princess had thrown. The darts made him fall to the ground. He hadn't thought about bringing a shield. After all, it couldn't have been the princess who was attacking him. One dart had reached a leg and the other dart struck his right arm. That pain didn't compare to what he was feeling when he confirmed that it was in fact the princess who was attacking him consciously. Kimia and Marjan suddenly appeared onto the scene. Kimia held Saleh, surrounding him, as Marjan's shield protected them from the pouring of darts. Another dart reached Saleh, seriously injuring him on the left side of his body. Kimia dragged Saleh, trying to avoid being struck by more darts. Now, a celestial warrior came for help, deflecting the darts that nearly impacted the body of the distraught and injured shepherd. Once out of the danger zone, Marjan took on the task of putting pressure over Saleh's injuries, trying to stop the bleeding. The 2 princesses listened in disbelief to the explanation offered to them by the shepherd about what had happened. Either Shahzaid had lost all reason, or something else was going on inside the castle. The 3 almost heard those demonic laughs being emitted by the beings of darkness, who bragged on about their indescribable victory. The hemorrhage caused Saleh to faint. The 2 women had to take him to his house. Once they were there, they tucked him into bed. Marjan heated water and looked for fabrics to use as bandages. Kimia, on the other hand, removed Saleh's shirt to clean out the dry blood from his skin. Both women hurried to clean off his blood and cover his injuries. There wasn't much else to do except wait for Saleh to react. They rested. Saleh's fever was worsening, for which Kimia rose immediately to go to her kingdom and bring a doctor to attend to Saleh, but not before giving brief instructions to Marjan on the care he should have with him. Marjan's large black eyes were glowing intensely despite the dim light of the oil lamps that lit the room. 2 tears sailed from her beautiful face. However, Marjan had to keep her spirit up and her blood cold, in order to do everything that Kimia instructed. The warm cloths helped in this difficult process, but the face of the brave warrior remained impassive, lost, even in his unconsciousness. Good thing. That way he won't feel the pain he would feel if he was awake, Marjan thought as she washed the face of this brave warrior. Her pulse accelerated, as she felt the touch of his beard under her fingers. She remembered her mother's words, "God has prepared the man for your life. Don't look at his handsomeness, riches or social status. Beauty, riches and even social status can be lost in a second." Marjan wept silently, remembering her mother's last words. The princes of this world are not worthy. They don't even deserve a single tear from your eyes. Guard your heart from those who can only offer you the garbage of this world. Marjan had many opportunities to get married, all of which she rejected. She was faithful to those words. Now, she wondered if this was the man that God may have reserved for her. Marjan was free to choose handsome, rich young men, suited for her social status, but felt attracted to this injured man beyond all reason. Her soft fingers slid down his face and lips. She put her pale hand on his forehead and began to pray earnestly for the recovery of that brave man. Saleh saw himself, next to a peaceful river whose clear waters allowed him to see the bottom of it. 2 grotesque figures approached him menacingly. He tried to reach for his sword. Nothing. Perhaps had forgotten it in his cabin, which was almost impossible. He searched in his clothes for a dagger used to cut small things. Nothing. He felt a strange feeling of suffocation, of persecution and anxiety. Then he observed the 2 beings that were on the other side of the river. They were tall and strong. Their faces were friendly. He went into the river. The water was freezing. It looked like it was the water that came down from the mountains in the early spring when thawing began. His legs were numbing quickly. Marjan rushed with extreme nervousness to keep the Soleil's body warm, which began to suffer from hypothermia due to blood loss. Soleil was walking deeper into the river, covering half of his body. Now, the two dark beings that were behind him looked at him with an evil grin. The only option he had was to move forward. There was no turning back. His body was freezing and his lips quivered, almost violently because of the intense cold. Marjan searched for blankets and furs to cover the body of this man, who was suffering the ravages of death. The princess wept and prayed desperately. She had never felt so lonely and abandoned. Never had she felt the heavens so shut and deaf to her prayer. Marjan fell to her knees, crying and holding on to the right hand of the dying Soleil, like the time she refused to let go of her mother's soul. Have pity on him, and I, omnipotent God, open your ears to my cry and answer my prayer, according to the multitude of your mercies. Let him live, please. One of the beings drew his glittering sword across the river, facing the evil entities that were ready to attack Soleil from behind. The other one also flew to the middle of the river and pulled Soleil out of the river with his powerful hands, returning him to shore. He leaned Soleil against the cool grass, while the other Celestial warrior exterminated two evil demons. Soleil, you must return. It is not your time to cross the river. There is still much work for you to be done. Warmth returned to his body and slowly stopped shivering. Marjan had fallen asleep from being exhausted and saddened from this situation. The cold of the early morning woke her up. She stood up and leaned next to Soleil, after checking that he was still alive and his breathing and temperature had stabilized. It had been an almost eternally dark night. At noon, Kimia entered the room and found Marjan lying at the feet of Soleil. She put this image in memory and thought of talking about it with her sister later. She brought her lips to the ear of Marjan, whispering, "Marjan, lie down and rest over there. I brought a doctor to cure this man." Marjan stood in an almost somnambulant manner, obeying the order of his sister. The doctor came into the room with his equipment and medicines. "What wounds? Judging by the color they have, this man must have lost a lot of blood. Good thing he was under good care. Your Majesty, Princess Marjan just saved the life of this individual." The doctor rubbed various ointments over the wounds and began to bandage the body once more, while Kimia headed to the kitchen to prepare some food. Marjan was hungry and she wanted to make up for the excellent care she had with the shepherd. Moments later, the doctor was gone. The recovery of the wounded man would be faster than normal and his services were no longer needed. He left some potions for the pain and ointments to avoid infection. The smell of stew woke Marjan. Kimia served food and some wine for both. "You look worried, Kimia," inquired Marjan. "You're right," recognized Kimia. "When I came into the house, I saw you lying next to the shepherd." "Yes." Kimia cleared her throat a bit and continued. "I know you did not know. You acted without thinking of the consequences. When a virgin lies at the feet of a man, it commits both to be married." Marjan's big black eyes seemed to grow enormously, at the same time that a bit of food fell to the plate before it could reach her mouth. "So, it was wrong?" "Well, given the circumstances, I wouldn't say that it was right or wrong. Had the shepherd been conscious or awake, the marriage would have to be consummated." Kimia looked thoughtful for an instant and added, "Maybe, and I mean, just maybe, this is a coincidence. But maybe, this is prophetic. I don't know." Marjan's heartbeat accelerated. Kimia didn't know what her mother had entrusted to her on her deathbed when she was little. Even so, she had to wait for everything to be confirmed. She shouldn't take the risk and come to conclusions so fast. Kimia was tired and now it was Marjan's turn to care for Soleil. And so, the young woman took a chair and put it next to Soleil's bed, grabbed a book and started reading. Soleil opened his eyes without moving or making any sounds. And then, he saw her. Without a doubt, she was the sister of those angels that saved him from the river. She was beautifully perfect, almost divine. Her black hair fell on one side the beautiful white skin, her black eyes danced in radiance and joy over the words of that book. Her long eyelashes slid down like fine curtains, covering these constellations. Her nose stood perfectly. Her red, thick and sensual lips were like grenade wedges that distilled honey. It was the most beautiful creature he had seen on the face of the earth. Saleh closed his eyes. Perhaps, this was the product of his imagination. Saleh closed his eyes. Maybe it was just a figment of his imagination. But even with closed eyes, he could smell the scent of her body. A floral fragrance, very typical of princesses, according to what he had heard. He felt the fine touch of fingers over his own hand and then felt a hand over his forehead, as he heard the sweet sound of a voice praying softly for him to God. Suddenly, he remembered. A dark night, the castle of Gam, darts being thrown, the pain from his injuries, 2 women approaching him and then, nothing. He knew he was still alive because of the miraculous apparition of those 2 women in the correct moment. Once again, he felt the touch of 2 fingers sliding from his face to his lips. Saleh felt immense peace and need to go back to sleep. Maybe it was the dream of death, but he was not afraid to die. Marjan continued to pray and thank that the danger of death had passed. Now, all that was needed was rest. She meditated in the words of Kimia and exposed her cause before God. Night came. Marjan put a couch next to Saleh's bed in case he needed to be attended. It was not needed. The night was calm. The bedroom was being guarded heavily by 6 powerful angels, brandishing their flaming swords occasionally. 19. The prophecy. Much more recovered from his wounds, Saleh woke early. At his side, on a couch, sleeping uncomfortably, was a beautiful girl. Without making much noise and with some pain in his body, he slowly rose from the bed, scooped up the young woman and lay her down on his bed. He clothed her well and quickly and leaned back in his chair. He never ceased to admire the beauty of this young lady, despite the soft light produced by the limelight, trying to break the early morning darkness. What happened? The shepherd remembered Princess Shahzade's behavior and started feeling strange resentment towards her. Meanwhile, Kimia observed everything. She noticed when Saleh rose from his bed. She could barely believe that he would take Marjan in his arms and lay her down on his own bed. Now, it would be improper to talk about something that Kimia knew that Saleh was also unfamiliar with. Powerful eternal actions are made, despite man's ignorance. Kimia discerned what was going through Saleh's mind, and rising slowly, she spoke to him softly, so as to not wake her sister from her sleep. Forgive her, Saleh. It's not worth it that you hold resentment towards Shahzade. Above all else, guard your heart, for it determines the course of your life. Sometimes people we love are hurting us unconsciously. We are experts in offending and hurting those around us. It's easy to hate. Everyone does that. But a true warrior of Noor can forgive, because they have chosen to do so, concluded the princess. Interestingly, Saleh was not taken by surprise by witnessing Kimia's presence. Her voice was soft but not weak. The shepherd closed his eyes momentarily, repeating to himself what he has just heard. Marjan opened her eyes and smiled by seeing Kimia and Saleh speaking in front of her. It was a beautiful dream. After all, Saleh was asleep in his bed and she was on. How did she get there? Wasn't she supposed to be sleeping on the couch? Kimia and Saleh made a gesture of approval for Kimia to stay in bed. Marjan abided. The bed was warmer and cozier than the couch, after all. Saleh's deep eyes tracked Marjan's big, black eyes in the dim light. Saleh didn't notice the blush over Marjan's face, nor did she notice Saleh's heartbeat increasing. However, Kimia noticed, and felt the power of love knocking on the door, and so, she approached Saleh to check on his injuries. The doctor was right. The injuries would heal rapidly. Without a doubt, a miracle touched Saleh's body. Finally, they formally presented themselves. Kimia was famous for being a brave princess and warrior that served the king of Noor, but her beauty surpassed her fame. Saleh, in his part, was known also for being a shepherd warrior, famous in prowess and survivor of bloody battles. Kimia presented her sister. She explained that Marjan had been welcomed as a daughter in the castle, soon after her father's passing. Despite the silence between Saleh and Marjan, Kimia felt love floating between them, like feathers in the wind, refusing to fall to the ground. Kimia stood to prepare the medicine for Saleh. Marjan was sleepy but refused to close her eyes. Saleh went to her and slid his fingers on her face, closing her eyes. Saleh saw a sharp smile forming on the face of his princess. He treasured that image. Kimia was reading the book. Saleh rested, processing the many things that had occurred recently, and Marjan slept peacefully. It was quite late when they had dinner. Saleh cooked and the princesses were more than satisfied with his secret recipe. The princesses joked with Saleh, telling him he was ready to get married. "Well, you see, what happens is that my wife has to be a princess. She must be beautiful and also love kids. She also has to be a good cook. I'm tired of my own recipes." "Oh, but what a picky man," laughed Kimia and Marjan. Saleh served wine and raising his cup, he said, "Forever grateful, for the privilege of knowing two beautiful princesses. Let everything that was said before eternity, be fulfilled, despite the contradictions of the times." "Amen. So be it," said the threesome together. "May God add blessings after blessings to our generations." "Amen. So be it. And may God fulfill his prophecy over our lives." "Amen. So be it." The hearts of both princesses moved before such prayer as they shared a glance. Then, the three remembered that they needed to come up with a strategy. A solid plan. They all agreed and would go through with it the next day. Saleh prepared his bed on the couch, allowing both princesses to sleep on his bed. The women soon fell asleep. They had a busy day and were exhausted. Saleh cherished the idea that Marjan could become the woman of his dreams. That night, he spoke with the prince. 20. An innocent game. In the morning, Shahzaid was being examined by a court doctor. The old doctor examined the stain that seemed to expand again from the prince's left shoulder. He rubbed his white, goat-like beard, pensively. He had never known of such a case. He prescribed some heart medicine and pain medicine, ordering her to be in absolute rest while promising to investigate the cause of the spot on her shoulder. The doctor also ordered servants around the clock, to care for her and give her the medicine promptly. Meanwhile, the three demons kept doing their constant jobs. The room was filled with music, under the influence of Melancholia, the melancholic demon, and the darts and dagger of demons Dart and Afzordigi sank in the head and heart of the princess time and time again. And as if that wasn't enough, the Kingdom of Darkness was about to unleash another attack against Shahzaid. The spirit of the dragon Gosisht begged to the Prince of Bad for the opportunity to go back and possess the body of Tariki, the prince's husband. Motam, the Prince of Darkness, marveled and praised the courage of his subordinate, Gosisht. Without thinking too much, he gave his approval to carry out this evil plan. Gosisht rubbed his bony hands in satisfaction to this new opportunity. Now, all they had to do was wait for Tariki and say to summon a spirit of the Kingdom of Bad to possess his body. Gosisht ordered Tanafer to influence Say's mind with the end of doing another ceremony against Shahzaid. Say woke in the mid-afternoon hours with the brilliant idea of inviting her love to initiate the dark ritual. Say was fascinated by all mystical things. She didn't know much about the magic and only did it for fun. The idea of a god wasn't compatible with her way of life, and she created her own religion, very similar to that of many people. Some herbs, strange spoken tongue, some bones used as amulets and artifacts of luck, and her usual depressive state of mind made a perfect mixture. Drugs were part of the routine. To her, the whole mysticism and ceremony deal were silly and innocent games, but she liked doing them. So, they went to the room used to perform such games. They closed the curtains, lit up candles and prepared sacrifices. They gathered the paint, dried bones and started the silly, but not innocent, macabre ceremony. In this ceremony, new and interesting things would most likely occur, now that a new spirit was present during the ceremony. In mockery, Tariki pretended to be in a trance while Say prepared the summoning. Say looked at Tariki angrily, seeing that hadn't closed his eyes. "Concentrate and blank out your mind," said Say. Tariki did. Brutal error. It didn't take long at all for the spirit of the dragon Gosisht to take possession of Tariki's body. Tariki's eyes turned white. His body convulsed dramatically and soon looked dead, lying on the floor, to the look of shock of Say, who laughed nervously, thinking that Tariki was playing games with her. Her laughter turned to panic when she heard a strange sound coming from his chest, as if a herd of swine squealed inside of him. Blood flowed from his eyes, as his body was levitating. The objects around the room were flying and smashing all over the room. Say trembled in fear, for she had never witnessed such a moment. It all started as child's play, but that game had gone out of control, controlling them. Tariki stood up, while the last scales of the dragon Gozisht hid under the skin. He opened his eyes. Say backed off in horror, before the penetrating look of Gozisht, through the eyes of his puppet, Tariki. She had always had control over Tariki. This time, however, she could see that her lover's personality had changed drastically. She witnessed the entire process of a real demonic possession. She was scared. Gozisht threatened, "Listen carefully, stupid slut. Don't even think about fooling me. Not even in your thoughts, or you will food for dogs, without having to chew you." Say paled. Tariki's voice was otherworldly. That cold stare made her feel as though a very thin steel wire was tensing, tightening her spine. She could not speak nor help but shudder. That was the last thing Say's eyes saw before she fell unconscious to Gozisht's triumphant look. His plan started the best way possible. With Say as an unconditional slave, his plan to kill Shahzaid would be much easier and quicker. Gozisht would wash away the shame and would ignore the authority of Motahem himself, embarrassing him. The underworld would have a new hero. Gozisht saw the naked body or Say and spit on it, walking over it. After all, Say was a stupid and ignorant piece of human scum, who only chose to belong to the kingdom of bad. Games with demons always bring about inevitable consequences, and now the two lovers witnessed this firsthand. Gozisht hatched a plan. Surely, it would work, if the reports that he had were accurate. Tariki headed to the castle of Gam. He wouldn't have problems entering it, since he also kept a copy of the key to the castle. The journey there wasn't too long, but gave him enough time to build a strategy. When he finally arrived, Tariki rubbed his eyes hard until they turned red and ruffled his hair. He slightly deranged his clothing and entered the room where he knew he would find his wife. Shahzaid, who was reading the book, opened her eyes in disbelief when she saw Tariki inside the room. She got up from her chair and backed off with panic reflected on her face. But Tariki kneeled before the princess, with tears in his eyes. "Forgive me, Shahzaid. I acknowledge that there is no better woman than you on this earth. Forgive me, because I was weak before Say's beauty. I swear to you that I will never be unfaithful to you again. Before anything, you will need to show me that your repentance is truthful, Tariki." "Of course, I understand," kept on the spirit of Gozisht, pretending to be sad and sorry. "I thought that you could forgive me, but I see now that's not the case. I was mistaken, thinking that warriors of Noor were forgiving." Tariki saw the book on the table. "Haven't you read the book, where it says that we must forgive our enemies up to 70 times 7? I repented and found forgiveness by presenting sacrifices and offerings to God." Tariki moaned. "I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Death is better than living life without you." Gozisht had pushed the last button. Princess Shahzaid knelt before Tariki, kissing him on the lips. "No, my love. Don't speak that way. You can come back home. Shahzaid, I promise I will go worship God with you. I will change my lifestyle. You'll see." Shahzaid hugged her beloved husband, trusting that he had repented and would change his life. Gozisht's spirit repressed a big laugh of triumph over that stupid and deluded princess. All of Kimia and Marjan's teachings were forgotten due to the lack of firmness of Shahzaid's character. Kimia was very clear in her opinions about Tariki. Dressed of hatred and lust, he can approach you without anyone else suspecting his real intentions because he's your husband, and can kill you with ease. "Don't worry," assured Shahzaid, "I can change him. I know myself and nothing is going to change my mind." Under Tariki's insistence, both returned to the residency that they owned in the city. Only a few weeks were necessary for Tariki to convince the servants to abandon the instructions given to them by the doctor. Tariqi made sure that Shahzaid had no medications, making her suffering more intolerable. One night, Tariqi dressed as a thief and sneaked into the bedroom thinking that Shahzaid was asleep. Seeing that she was awake, he tried to kill her, hitting and struggling with her, until the princess was able to escape from his hands. In those moments, a celestial guardian intently caused the attacker to stumble and fall, hitting his head against the table and leaving him unconscious. Shahzaid fled amidst the constant attacks provoked by the demons. She headed to the royal stables, saddled her horse and left in a hurry. She found herself scared, pained and weeping as she rid along to Tars, the kingdom of fear, constantly worrying that her attacker could find her. She arrived in the city and searched for shelter, where she could rest a bit and be in hiding until she felt safe. Tars, a kingdom named under its lord of the same name, effusively welcomed the demons who tormented the princess. Meanwhile, Motam, Prince of Darkness, asked himself why 4 demons were incapable of destroying the spirit of such a sick and weakened princess. Motam remembered Gozisht with contempt. What irony! A powerful dragon had been defeated by a simple shepherd and mocked by a stupid and ignorant dying princess. Without a doubt, the kingdom of Bad was the laughingstock of the kingdom of Noor. In the meantime, the spirit of the dragon Gozisht would be rewarded, having failed his new mission. There would come a time for that. The princess could not sleep that night, suffering from the constant aches and pains that were all too familiar by now, though remain bothersome. Even so, she would not be able to sleep, knowing her enemies were out there, searching for her like hunting dogs. 21. Marg's rebellion. The pain was unbearable. Shahzaid felt her head was about to explode. Her heart was weak and found herself in the middle of anguish and despair. If only death would come. If only she could free herself from the pain. If only she could free herself from her enemies. If only. She had to take a risk and call a doctor when a hemorrhage dripped from her ears and nose. The demons hurled raucous laughter. Nothing and no one could reverse the damage they caused in the body and soul of the princess. The doctor examined her, advising her to rest, leaving a maid in her service. That same afternoon, she was received an unexpected visit from Khandadan. She tracked Shahzaid's trail and followed it until she found her. Khandadan told Shahzaid that Kimia, Marjan and a friend of theirs continued praying in her favor. It was comforting knowing that a strange man and her friends continued to pray for her despite having attacked them. Something odd was happening in her heart. It looked like her destiny was about to take a turn. She wanted to leave her past behind, survive in the new present and dream of a better future. However, the spirit of fear knocked on her mind. The tiny demon tried to cover her ears. Shahzaid asked her friend to read something in the book. She needed to be comforted by the words of the prince. Are any among you suffering? They should pray. Khandadan noticed a new glow in the princess' eyes and a soft smile drawn across her face. The prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise them up, and anyone who has committed sins will be forgiven. It was as if the sun emerged mightily during the darkest of nights. And she was not mistaken. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. Shahzaid finally found sleep, after lifting an honest, sincere prayer that was heard in the heavens. The maid came to stay in Khandadan's place. Her friend needed to return to her city with urgency. She deposited a kiss over Shahzaid's forehead and left. Some days passed. There was very little physical rest for Shahzaid, for the forces of evil kept active and constant fear surrounded her daily. The angel in charge of caring for Shahzaid remained by her side tirelessly. He could not understand why the princess didn't ask for help. At times, it looked like Shahzaid was happy, when she was able to rest, but would easily forget to fight and conquer her enemies. He was there to protect and defend her. But he also had the ability to fight and end, once and for all, with her adversaries, who stuck to her like leeches. The angel could tolerate the mockery from the demons against him, but it hurt him to see that Shahzaid wasn't searching for divine help. If only you could see that there are many like me, that we are sent by God to protect you, to destroy any enemy, to help in any need. All it takes is to ask. God will send us immediately. "We were created to serve all who belong in the Kingdom of Noor," moaned the angel. After all, Shahzaid had read the condition and promise. "Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you in due time." A promise that many claimed, without first complying with the commanded condition. She had forgotten that. Very early, one morning, someone came to Shahzaid with a message, announcing that Tariqi, his attacker, was on his way. Tariqi had bribed some people who had betrayed the trust of Shahzaid, tipping her exact location. With that, a very broken-down Shahzaid saddled up the horse and fled once more, this time to a place far away. Though the morning was cold and rainy, she went to the graveyard in Jahan, where her parents were buried. Shahzaid took some flowers and knelt in front of the tomb, under the discreet watch of the man who looked after the graveyard. Tears mixed with raindrops and her pale cheeks turned red from the cold. Suddenly, Shahzaid fainted from the weakness and pain. It looked like Marg was winning the battle. The man in charge of the graveyard ran to her and carried her into her carriage, riding to the home the doctor in Jahan. Shahzaid's heartbeat was weak. There was very little hope of surviving this new threat. The Kingdom of Darkness began to make preparations of feast and celebration for Marg's imminent victory of handing death over to his enemy. When they heard about the news, Khanadin, Kimia and Marjan arrived at the doctor's house to take care of her. A real miracle was needed if she was going to survive and recover from this. Marjan sent a message to the shepherd, informing him of the delicate physical situation that the princess was in. Saleh, on his side, sent a message to his peers, inviting them to sharpen their swords until the battle is won. And so, each peer did just that. The demon Marg had beaten the princess' heart with hatred, breaking one of the arteries. Although the demons were told to make her suffer, none of them were given permission to kill her. However, the intense hatred Marg felt for her, made him take the decision to do just that. To the surprise of his partners, the demon raised his head with an air of presumptuous victory. No one would take away the glory of having finished with that miserable princess' life. The demon came down from the bed, majestically, with a heart swollen with pride. He would be recognized by the spiritual entities of the Kingdom of Bad as the utmost hero of this story. Princess Shahzaid had died, nothing else could be done. The doctors gave up trying to revive the princess and abandoned the room. Khanadin said her goodbyes teary-eyed, taking her carriage and leaving for her city. They would contact her with the details of the funeral. Saleh, who had just arrived, found Kimia and Marjan next to Shahzaid, who remained in the intense labor of prayer, sharpening their weapons, fighting with an invisible but real enemy. "Your dead shall live, their corpses shall rise. O dwellers in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a radiant dew, and the earth will give birth to those long dead." They prayed unanimously. Marg felt weak. His head started to spin. Something strange was happening to him. He only felt that when someone was about to. No, the memories of that day terrified him. He refused to believe that it was happening again. Marg understood that the soul that silly princess was not worthy enough for the prince to decide to bring her back to life. The prayers of Saleh, Kimia and Marjan were heard in the heavens, and they witnessed the miracle that they were waiting to see. The power of resurrection was present in that room. Hearing the cheers, the doctors re-entered, taking charge of the situation and inviting Saleh, Marjan and Kimia to leave the room. The three were outside, just to make sure everything was alright. Finally, exhausted from their efforts in prayer, they left to rest briefly. 22 The Order The Kingdom of Darkness was being defeated once again. Princess Shahzaid was recovering slowly but steadily. Her heart was being trained to fight and defeat. Only a few hours passed when Tariqi, controlled by the spirit of the dragon Gozisht, showed up, along with Say. Fear struck the princess and the nurses, as the possessed heard the order to kill Shahzaid in his head. His eyes were like blazing fire, full of hatred, while his voice rose above the screams of terror and schizophrenia of the nurses and the princess. Say tried to prevent Tariqi from hurting Shahzaid. Gozisht struck his eyes on Say, taking her neck and snapping it with ease, as if it was a fragile, dry branch, and threw her in the air, smashing her against the wall. Say was lifeless. Gozisht fulfilled his promise. Invisible demons wrestled with the evil spirit of the deceased Say, who was led into the abyss. Without mercy, Tariqi dragged Shahzaid to the door. The nurses and doctors could do absolutely nothing. It was all so fast that everyone was petrified, leaving the princess helpless. The possessed took Shahzaid, who was cried for her life, to the carriage. She was in a very delicate state, but angelical warrior kept her alive. Gozisht threatened to kill the princess if anyone left the room. Hours passed before one of the nurses was able to prove that Tariqi was no longer present. Saleh, Kimia and Marjan ran to the room after one of the nurses informed them of the facts. Saleh got on his horse and tried to follow the carriage's trail, while Kimia and Marjan couldn't forgive themselves for having left Shahzaid's side, without protection. They looked at each other in frustration. They knew they would never see the princess again unless a miracle happened. Sobbing in sadness, Kimia and Marjan returned to their kingdom. They had witnessed a miracle, but they had also witnessed a cruel battle which seemed lost. They could not hear the gentle whisper of his voice. We know that God makes all things work together for the good of those who love him and are chosen to be a part of his plan. In some faraway kingdoms are still warriors sharpening their swords, waiting for the princess' liberation through celestial warriors. The mobarezan of Noor from faraway kingdoms were given instructions: resist him, steadfast in your faith, for you know that your brothers and sisters in all the world are undergoing the same kinds of suffering. 23. Victory. Shahzaid was semi-conscious. Dazed and shaken by the unexpected appearance of Tariqi, she felt afraid. Very afraid. She thought the swaying of the carriage would cause her nausea. Or was it Tariqi's presence? There was something very strange and powerful about him. She looked at the shoulders of the man who she once loved. Her father was quite right when he warned her that suffering could become her sentence. Now, Saleh, Kimia and Marjan were not there. Now she was alone and would have to confront something that she never dared to before, her own responsibility and destiny. Even though she feared how Tariqi was going to react, she had to face him once and for all. After all, she said to herself, if God is on our side, who could come against us? She got up painfully and sat next to Tariqi, who was herding the horses furiously. Gozisht acknowledged her and began to speak softly, sweetly to her. My love, I came for you because I love you. You are my wife and you need to be by my side. Remember that we married and nothing can separate you from me, chattered Tariqi. However, for some strange reason, Shahzaid heard his words, distant and meaningless, as if emerging from a tunnel. As if coming from the abyss. Slight goosebumps made her shiver. Shahzaid, said the soft voice. The princess turned her head to the opposite side of Tariqi, where the voice was speaking. There was nobody there. Might she be going mad? Shahzaid, repeated the voice. Shahzaid's spirit identified the voice of the speaker. Be strong and courageous, do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I'm scared, said Shahzaid silently. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's spirit when he adopted you as his own children. But, I can't defeat him. I have been scared of people like him my entire life, recognized the princess humbly. But you belong to God, my dear child. You have already won a victory over those people, because the spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world. My lord, please, help me to trust in you. My faith is not enough. My faith is weak, cried Shahzaid. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? The unceasing talk of claims from Tariqi brought Shahzaid to back natural reality. Stop! Ordered Shahzaid, taking Gozisht by surprise, who felt a familiar sense of higher authority through this order. I have submitted to you for too long. I've been enslaved to all the whims and perversities of yours. I have endured the insults and cruel atrocities, because one day I swore to love you for life despite the advice of my father. You treated me worse than trash. You have made me feel that I am a human scum. But I'm tired of all this. The powerful word was beginning to flow from Shahzaid's lips. The bow of the mighty is now broken, and those who stumbled are now strong. The Lord gives both death and life. He brings some down to the grave but raises others up, and today, he has risen me and you will have to accept that your life is about to end. Tariqi spoke. "I can accuse you of being an adulterer, an immoral woman. I have witnesses that a man named Saleh has visited you in the castle. Besides, he is a beggar, a bum, a man who is not of royal blood. But what do you know about morality and royalty, Tariqi? He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes, placing them in seats of honor. For all the earth is the Lord's, and he has set the world in order." Shahzaid continued, "You want to defame me? I don't fear your threats, because God will protect his faithful, but the wicked like you disappear into darkness. No one will succeed by force, and you've already abused it. You will witness and know that those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. He thunders against them from heaven, the Lord judges throughout the land. He gives power to his king, and increases the strength of his anointed, which you called beggar. I pity you," Tariqi concluded the princess. Gozisht was more than stunned. How right the kingdom of Bad was to fear this princess. Tariqi's mind could not assimilate the scene he had just witnessed. That was not Shahzaid. Perhaps the influence of that shepherd named Saleh transformed her into fierce. The spirit of Gozisht snorted, "But you are not a complete woman. You are infertile. You can't give birth to children. Such a woman can only be a prostitute." Gozisht nailed his last dagger in the heart of the princess. Or so he believed. "No, Tariqi. I am not an infertile woman. I was. While I let you take away my life. I was an infertile woman, because the tradition you put over my shoulders tied my hands and feet. Today, I can serve others. I can help the needy. I can put all my skills to serve my fellow men." "Are you going to become a slave then?" asked Tariqi in mockery. "I was your slave. I was slave to so many traditions that all of you, who believe you are so powerful, you who take advantage of religion to put your perverse influence in action, putting harsh burdens on our shoulders. Ignorance and hollow religion made us bow down so that you could step on our heads. But God has brought us prosperity through the truth. And even if you see me as a slave, God designed me to be a princess and I will not give up that call." Shahzaid continued beating on Gozisht's resistance with divine authority. "I have been under the protection of many friends who love me, but it's time for me to fight against all that has kept me enslaved. I finally understood that I can't depend on everyone else's help. I have to fix my own life and help those who are weak," said Shahzaid with bravery and purpose. "But you are obliged to remain by my side. We signed a pact that only death can undo," sentenced Tariqi. "Pact," repeated Shahzaid in a sad tone. "A pact which you never lived by. A pact that you signed because you sought convenience of taking over my kingdom. I will not break that pact, despite knowing that this marriage didn't have God's approval, or my father's," continued the sovereign woman. Hearing this made Tariqi's eyes glow with hope and greed. "I won't break the pact," repeated Shahzaid. "I will simply ask you to never again return to me. God paid a high price for me, and I will not allow myself to be enslaved by you any longer." Gozisht roared savagely. That was the last he could tolerate from that weak and braggart princess. Gozisht tried to manipulate Tariqi's body to strangle Shahzaid, but a bright, sharp sword sliced his neck. Tariqi fell from the carriage onto the ground. He lost consciousness and almost was ran over by the horses. Shahzaid felt the firm order to keep advancing and not come back for him. She abided. The celestial warrior smiled by her side, with his sword still dripping with the greenish blood of that little tadpole. Shahzaid had won. She took her time to give thanks for the victory she was granted. Now she went, determined to put her own issues in order. In the meantime, she was to direct her path to the kingdom of Makan Sal, where Kimia and Marjan stayed. She could never return to the castle of Gom ever again, and in the back of her head, though about later demolishing it. She was still weak, but she was so happy that she didn't even realize that her pain was gone. She would probably regain her strength fully in the castle with Kimia and Marjan. 24. The accomplishment. The doctor arrived very early in the morning for routine exams. The doctor smiled in satisfaction seeing that his last diagnosis was correct. Shahzaid would recover favorably, as she was supposed to, according to him. Kimia only smiled, allowing the doctor to be satisfied by believing that the stain had disappeared because of his medications. The doctor was well known and Princess Kimia didn't want to discredit him. There would be another time when she could explain to the old man, in private, what really happened. Kimia called her messengers, asking them to prepare the royal carriage and bring Saleh to the castle immediately. It was noon when the messengers arrived with the shepherd. Fortunately, he had bathed and shaved early in the morning. When they arrived at the castle, he was told to remove his clothes, as Kimia had ordered previously, and was then dressed in a royal outfit. The shepherd looked in the mirror. Wow! Is that me? There was a mixture of joy and nervousness. What was happening? Why did Kimia bring him there? Was it all a dream? He told himself that everything would be explained once the princess showed herself. Lately, Saleh spent much time thinking about Princess Marjan. Shahzaid had been a type of spiritual burden, and today he thanked God for the dangerous adventure in which he found himself helping her. It was because of that adventure that he had met Marjan. The royal messengers came to Saleh once more, urging him to come with them. This time, there were 4 royal messengers, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, walking firmly but in moderation. Saleh nervously examined the possibility that Kimia realized that he had fallen in love with Marjan. After all, it wasn't a crime, was it? That heightened his nervousness. They passed through an enormous room where there was a great banquet. The shepherd could see, enjoying it, how the party planner yelled orders to each of the servants. Then, they arrived in the throne room. This time, 2 thrones were added to the sides of the great throne. There was a deep feeling of expectation, since the aristocrats, feudal lords and noblemen were summoned unexpectedly, without knowing the motive. It was a large and spacious room. The great throne could be seen in the back, where Princess Kimia was sitting, waiting on Saleh's arrival. The trumpets announced his arrival. The messengers and Saleh kept walking to the throne in a steady pace, followed only by the echo of their own footsteps. Almost at the same time, the beautiful Princess Marjan appeared with a bouquet of white flowers on her hands, sitting to the left of Kimia's throne as usual. Marjan's dark eyes glittered with intensity. She felt profound emotion seeing Saleh arriving, escorted by the royal entourage. She had no idea of the ceremony that would take place in that moment. Kimia always shared her plans with anticipation, but this ceremony has a surprise to her. The ceremony would of course be about Saleh's appointment as one of the gentlemen of the kingdom. Heroes were decorated with titles and rewarded in gold or with lands. When they arrived at the throne, the messengers left, leaving Saleh in front of Kimia. Saleh took the opportunity to give Marjan a quick glance, who looked radiantly beautiful. Both blushed. "Welcome, shepherd," said Princess Kimia, outlining a beautiful smile, but in a solemn voice. A trumpet announced the arrival of Princess Shahzaid. Princess Kimia stood, followed by Marjan. Shahzaid looked radiant, beautiful, fragile and strong all at the same time. Shahzaid kissed Kimia on the cheeks and also hugged and kissed Marjan. Shahzaid turned around, facing Saleh and the people who were present, without waiting for Kimia to begin her speech. "With nothing, would I be able to pay for the love and sacrifice that these friends have showed me? I am so thankful with them and of course, with the mobarezan Saleh, a true warrior of the Kingdom of Noor. I beg you to kneel down," said Kimia, while a nobleman entrusted Shahzaid with a gleaming sword. Here came the moment that Princess Marjan waited for, so much so, that she could hardly contain her tears. "From today on forward, in front of these witnesses, I, Princess Shahzaid, Princess and ruler of Gam, officially name you, Prince of my kingdom, which I give on to you," she said, while touching the shepherd's shoulders. The sound of applause in the audience was weaker than the energetic applause of Marjan. Her soul rejoiced with disappointment. Princess Kimia took the sword and said, "I too, entrust to you the kingdom adjacent to ours, which you shall name as you wish, having complete control over it," at the same time that she put a crown over his head. The applauding continued. Marjan, with her face red from embarrassment, had to applaud with a little less emotion. "My lady and Princess Kimia," said Saleh, "you know my heart more than I know it myself. I have loved Marjan for a long time." He directed the conversation toward Marjan. I had nothing to offer you, Princess Marjan, but my life. Today, I beg you to accept my love, my life and all that from today on I will be offered." Again, Saleh faced Kimia. "Princess Kimia, if you have granted me the grace of being Prince Ngam, which I give the name of Lezat, because it will undoubtedly be a kingdom of joy and gladness, then as prince and before all these witnesses, I ask the hand of your sister, Princess Marjan, in marriage, swearing my undying love," said the shepherd, as he removed a simple gold ring from his clothes. Princess Kimia stood from her throne. One day, many years ago, it was prophesied that Princess Marjan would marry a just and noble man. I witnessed 2 events that confirmed this prophecy. The invitees were more than intrigued. Marjan was nervous. Many nights ago, Marjan was asleep, not knowing the meaning of being at the feet of Prince Saleh. The invitees murmured, understanding, faithful to tradition, that both were to be married. Kimia continued, after making a gesture of silence, which all obeyed. The next morning, Prince Saleh took Princess Marjan in his arms, lying her down on his own bed. The murmur became generally loud, for which Kimia had to raise her voice. I must say, that Prince Saleh also ignored this tradition and committed no malice whatsoever in this action. I was present on both occasions. And so, according to what has been prophesied, and according to our traditions, and because I have been witness to the love surrounding the two, I grant you, Prince Saleh, Princess Marjan's hand in marriage. It is my prayer that God prosper you with riches, spiritual, physical and material, to your lives." Saleh stood next to his princess. With a beautiful smile on her lips, and glowing from happiness, Marjan extended her hand so that the prince could insert the ring in one of her delicate fingers, in the approval of Kimia. Kimia came to them with a gold vase filled with pure water. According to their marital tradition, the man gathered his hands as the priest poured water on them for the woman to drink out of them, as an act of absolute obedience to her husband and therefore sealing the marital pact. Saleh took Marjan's hands and imprisoned them in his, also opening the hands of Princess Marjan to receive water in her own hands, to the astonishment of Marjan and all present. Thereupon, the warrior bent to drink water from the hands of his beloved. Then, he looked into the eyes of his beautiful princess and said, "Princess Marjan, I put heaven and earth as witnesses of my undying love and respect for you. My mind, my soul and my body will only belong to you, to the end of our days with the help and guidance of God." Saleh was deliberately restoring monogamous law that the prince had established the Kingdom of Noor. Women applauded frenetically, thrilled, feeling vindicated before this law, while tears of gratitude and happiness slid in most of them. The influences of the Kingdom of Bad had allowed polygamy law, whose effects were devastating on feminine self-esteem for considering them to be sexual objects. Princess Marjan also cried of excitement, while Prince Saleh kissed her hands. Now, Marjan held Saleh's hands so that she could drink the water from his hands. "Prince Saleh, I put heaven and earth as witnesses of my undying love and respect for you. I take you as my lord, as my husband, as my master and partner in this life and in eternity. I give up my position as princess to become your wife, allowing you to govern my life," said an excited Marjan. Princess Kimia, along with the most faithful priests of Noor, splashed the newly married couple with flower water and fragrances, blessing them in the name of God. In those moments, between the castle windows, a light filtered through, drowning the place, the instant when both princes kissed before Kimia and hundreds of witnesses, who cheered and applauded the marriage. Princess Shahzaid was among the closest friends of Princesses Marjan and Kimia. She wept with pure emotion as they embraced each other. Saleh and Marjan went to the castle's balcony to present themselves to the people of the kingdom, who were already notified of the event. The couple held hands, bowing to worship the one God and blessed their beloved people. That was the most beautiful of mornings since long ago. Happiness and joy could be felt throughout the kingdom. It was something inexplicable, but it was what they had hoped for many years. Prince Saleh ordered that the royal wedding banquet be held outside of the castle, where everyone could take part of the feast. Each person inside the castle praised the prince's decision. There was no difference between noblemen and servants, such that everyone helped setting up tables and bringing food so that the kingdom could unite in exhilaration. The rich served the poor, children of all social statuses played together. Old disputes were forgiven and feuds forgotten. The shepherd had finally brought happiness, not only to Princess Shahzaid but to the entire kingdom of Lezant, previously known as Gam. Princess Kimia ordered a few of her servants to make preparations for the prince and his wife to have a temporary home when they come back from their honeymoon, while a new castle is built. Those orders rapidly traveled to the people responsible for taking on such a task. The banquet continued for many hours, and in the afternoon, the princes said their goodbyes to their beloved people. They took their belongings and headed to a small cottage in the mountain, where they would spend their first days of love. 25. An unexpected surprise. Kimia asked Shahzaid to move into her castle indefinitely. Kimia was going to Miss Marjan for a few months and didn't want to be alone. There was enough space in the castle for Shahzaid after all. The princess accepted this offer. Shahzaid decided to settle a few things. All of her possessions had been transferred to Prince Saleh as a way of thanking him for all he had done for her. In any case, Saleh would make better use of all the assets. Some weeks passed after Saleh and Marjan's wedding. The couple had not returned and it was necessary that they had a place to live. So, Shahzaid decorated one of the best mansions that they had inherited. The servants admired Shahzaid's motivation in taking on this project, for she worked with her own hands along with her faithful servants. After many days of labor, Shahzaid returned to Kimia's castle. The notaries wouldn't take long to arrive to seal the final signatures for the transfer of possessions to Saleh. When she returned to Kimia's castle, she was notified that Khandadan was waiting for her in one of the visitors' rooms. "Listen to her and discern," whispered the prince to Shahzaid's spirit. The princess walked to the visitor's room until she found her unexpected visit. "My dear Shahzaid, how great it is to see you again," said Khandadan as she kissed and hugged the princess. "Forgive me for showing up so unexpectedly. I am so glad you are alive. It is great having you back. I have been quite busy since the last time I saw you and have been forced to travel. Now I'm here, just hoping to get some rest," admitted Shahzaid. Khandadan looked to her sides, making sure no one else was in the room. She came closer to Shahzaid and started speaking in a low voice. "You have to tell me about him." "I beg your pardon? I don't understand what you want to know, Khandadan." "Oh, you can have the confidence to tell me everything. Everyone says you have a boyfriend. I've heard you have a shepherd for a lover. A man named Soleh or Saleh. You could have chosen a rich young man of your position," continued the woman. "Oh, the things you two must have been enjoying in your castle of Gam. Although, I personally would have gone somewhere else. I don't know why you two chose that castle. There is nothing romantic about it." Shahzaid felt a mix of shame and pity for that woman, who for many years had called friend, always getting into other people's affairs, making wrong assumptions and getting people in trouble. She began to feel the suspicion that she had been sent by Tariqi, to look for evidence so that she could be accused of adultery. It would be easy to judge and seize the assets of the princess. Shahzaid smiled slightly. A whole social life wasted, constantly worrying about hiding her face, of being surrounded by so many people posing as her friends and inviting people who society labeled as important, only to realize that the human heart was full of lies, greed, lust and vanity. Khandadan's eyes shone lustily waiting for the gossip. Her ears were more open than a grave, waiting to swallow the remains of a decomposing body. "Princess?" pressured Khandadan. "My dear friend, I am no longer a princess. I gave up my position and have gifted all assets. I have nothing left. I am only a guest in this castle, invited by Kimia." Khandadan's eyes opened almost to the point of leaving their orbits from the shock. She simply couldn't believe it, even though there was no reason for Shahzaid to lie. Deuced, one of Shahzaid's faithful servants entered the room to announce that the notaries had arrived. "Excellent. Have them come to the room, please," answered Shahzaid. Khandadan had seen this servant somewhere, but couldn't remember where. She had very good memory. She was very good with faces and would surely remember. It was only a matter of seconds. "Khandadan, my friend. You can't deny me the honor of signing as one of the witnesses of the documents of the inheritance. I was going to ask Kimia, but was gone before I arrived. Conditen's face became livid, almost transparent from the constant rain of strong impressions. She still couldn't get over the first shock when the second one was about to pop in. Such news provoked so much confusion, that she didn't have time to get out of signing the documents. The notaries started adding Conditen's name to every document, as they read the terms to her. She signed each paper with shaky hands, granting universal hereditary power to that so-called shepherd named Soleil. She signed them quickly and left the castle, excusing herself to Shahzaid, claiming to have other errands to run, which was a lie. All she wished for was to get out of that place and vomit from the tension of the moment and the anguish of having to face her lover Tariki. A revelation came to her suddenly. Of course. She remembered now. She saw that servant in that brothel months ago. She hired the prostitutes that almost killed Shahzaid from pain and shame, and now regretted spending all much money on them now that Shahzaid was still alive. She felt life cruelly mocking her. Tariki and she were after Shahzaid's immense wealth for years, and now it was extremely humiliating, knowing that it all went to the hands of stupid shepherd. Life was not fair, at least not with her. She couldn't comprehend her miserable luck. She cried in frustration, impotence, bitterness and rage. She kept vomiting, thinking how it was that she was letting out all these emotions in that same moment. Meanwhile, the horses driving her carriage moved nervously, being witnesses to this dramatic scene. Perhaps, they could see that demons cruelly whipped Conditen's mind and soul. She headed to the mansion. It wouldn't be an easy or pleasing moment. She arrived at the stables, leaving the carriage and horses in the hands of the servants. She crossed her garden furiously and came inside, leaving the door open. Tariki awaited in the main living area, smiled and anxious to hear about the results of his brilliant plan. Seeing Conditen's expression, he knew that things didn't turn out how he imagined. He armed with patience and heard the sad story. Enraged, Tariki stood from the sofa where he sat and squeezed Conditen's neck, who struggled, fighting for her life. The screaming altered the servants, who ignored the cries of help. It was probably one more of the many fights from their masters, who had told them to stay out of their noses in the past, or else they would be punished. A lifeless Conditen fell to the floor. The fighting was over. Now there was deafening silence, but no peace. Feeling rage and fear boiling inside of him, Tariki took a horse and fled the mansion. Despite the many influences he had with his friends, he wouldn't be able to escape jail time, since Conditen was Mozabat's lover, a prince of Jahan who would not forgive the death of his girlfriend. 26 Peace. It was quite odd that Shahzaid didn't come to eat breakfast with her that morning. The princess loved drinking her morning coffee with Kimia. The day before, they had spent the entire day walking and laughing together. They went to bed late, but Shahzaid always got up early to prepare coffee for her dear friend Kimia. This morning, Dust prepared the coffee, who wondered why her master hadn't come downstairs. Kimia went to Shahzaid's bedroom, accompanied by Dust. They knocked on her door but got no answer. Kimia pushed the door and entered the room. A ray of light entered through the windows, resting softly over the prince's face. Her hands were crossed over her chest. The silence was absolute. There was peace. Dust's hands were squeezed lightly on Kimia's. The princess was no longer suffering. She was finally free. The bitterness and pain that ruled her heart for so long no longer had power over her life. Princess Shahzaid enjoyed peace. True peace. Dust started weeping in silence. Kimia let go of her hand to hug her. "My lady, that woman was so good to me and my mother," sobbed Dust. "I know, Dust. Nobody was as good as her." Dust decided to move into Ramat's house. That woman had cared for her needs and heart in the worst moments of her life, and she didn't want to abandon her. Dust started calling her mother. Ramat worked for Shahzaid for many years and witnessed almost all of Shahzaid's sufferings. Ramat provided her with spiritual support. When Shahzaid needed shelter to hide, Ramat offered her home. The princess only stayed with her 2 nights, and it was in the house, where Shahzaid and Dust met. "There's no need for you to explain anything, dear Dust. I know life is cruel and sometimes it drives us to make mistakes and sin against others. You didn't know you would be deceived that night. I know that God motivated you to leave that place. I could see it in your eyes. God looked at your heart and now he is rewarding you with this good woman," expressed Shahzaid. Shahzaid didn't know that Dost's mother had abandoned her shortly after giving birth. This had caused bitterness and resentment in her life. She never met her parents, but found the love and refuge in Ramat's heart that she had longed for so long. Dost wept on Shahzaid's lap. There wasn't enough time or words that could express all the repentance that she felt for causing the princess so much pain. "Listen, when all of this is over, I want you and Ramat to come live with me in Kimia's castle." "I know she will agree. I need Ramat more each day and I believe that you are the blessing from heaven that she has been waiting for." Dost took Shahzaid's hands and kissed them. "Yes, my queen. As you wish. We want to spend the rest of our lives under your wing, because your heart is like an angel's heart." Shahzaid, Ramat and Dost wept and laughed, thankful. Recalling that day brought new tears to Dost. God was good, allowing Shahzaid and Dost to meet. How right the mobarezan were by saying that God lifts the poor from the ashes and sits them among princes. The funeral was majestic and full of color, flowers, fragrances and music. After all, she was an example to all women who were also suffering at the hands of the kingdom of Bad. All the people of the kingdom assisted and cried over the death of the ruler. Her story and acts were shared. She was a brave woman. News ran to neighboring kingdoms that the authorities sentenced Tariki for the death of Say and Khandadan and that he committed suicide in his jail cell to the thought of having lost Shahzaid's fortune forever. 27. The Awakening of Noor. When they returned to the kingdom, Saleh and Marjan installed themselves in their new home, the mansion that Shahzaid had gifted to them and decorated with her own hands, while the new castle of Lezat was built. They went to visit Kimia, who filled them in on what happened during the last months. Saleh and Marjan were sorry for not being present during Shahzaid's death. Then, they met Ramat and Dost, who helped Kimia's servants. "They are helpers of servants, without a doubt," explained Kimia with melancholy. "They served Shahzaid far beyond possible." Ramat and Dost were called on Saleh's petition. They arrived immediately while still drying their hands on their aprons. They bowed to their leader. "Ramat and Dost," said Saleh, "I would be dishonoring Princess Shahzaid if I don't follow my consciousness and heart. My wife and I want to honor you for the service you provided to our beloved Shahzaid, by endorsing one of the mansions that belong to her over to you. We will provide you with farmers to work the land to sustain you in generations to come." Kimia and Marjan stood to hug Ramat and Dost, who were overwhelmed and thankful. Marjan looked at her husband with love, respect and admiration. That man kept conquering each part of her being. She came up to him, wiped off her eyes and kissed his lips. Saleh accepted her stunning princess kiss. Ramat and Dost left the room, while Kimia, Marjan and Saleh carried on with their conversation, catching up with everything. Hours passed without even realizing it and Dost returned to announce that dinner was served. Ramat prepared a special meal. After dinner, they rested in one of the bedrooms. The next day they had to go to their kingdom. There were thousands of things the couple had to learn to forget, and returning to the castle of Gom didn't help. Now, was a new kingdom and a new beginning. It was a kingdom where love had triumphed and established itself. In fact, it looked as though the sun could penetrate the clouds easily where the new castle was being built. When time passed, a messenger of the King of Kings brought them an additional sword as a gift. Since it was new, it lacked sharpness. Both had enough skill in the art of sharpening their swords. Sometimes, in the mornings, sometimes in the afternoons and even at night. It was a tiring but worthy task. They had the feeling that as they sharpened their sword together, many souls were freed. They were not mistaken. Standing on top of the mountain and holding hands, Princess Marjan and Prince Saleh contemplated the valley where the former castle that kept Shahzaid captive was nearly in ruins. The cool morning breezes gently stroked Marjan's face. She closed her big, beautiful black eyes, feeling the sun kiss her face as her long dark hair flew freely over her shoulders. They sighed, remembering all the pain Shahzaid had endured in that prison, held captive by the dragon Gozisht, also allowing the memory of suffering to take her to prisons of depression and anxiety, even darker than hell itself. And so, with her eyes shut, tears rolled down her white cheeks. Tears of love and gratitude, for all that Saleh did for Shahzaid, listening, meditating and feeling her pain, willing to fight for a stranger, willing to die in the battle against the dragon with the ends of liberating the princess. Saleh, while still holding hands with his princess, intuits what is going on in her heart. The journey was long, the fight was tough, but the reward was even greater. A silent prayer of gratitude came from the shepherd's lips, an intense prayer that came from deep inside his grateful heart. He also cried. Both opened their eyes, walking to the old castle of Gam. A mighty light from above penetrated the dark clouds, filling all the land. In that moment, they witnessed in astonishment how the castle of sadness began to crumble from the ground, the highest tower, as the clouds step aside, giving way to sunlight for the first time. It was like an explosion without sound. They could see how the enormous stones disintegrated, until there was no trace of them. They were so caught up in the sight provided by the valley that they barely noticed their accelerated heartbeats. The surprise and thrill of seeing that castle disintegrated made them hug even more. The princess laid her head on the shepherd's shoulder as they continued to witness the castle's destruction. Tears kept flowing over their cheeks as if cleansing each corner of their souls. Shahzaid had vehemently desired to see the destruction of the dark mansion with her own eyes. Today her wish was being fulfilled. The past, the pain, the tears and all that the castle represented for them was gone. Everything was vaporized. A new view surged before their eyes. From inside the earth emerged a spring, quickly marking the creek through the valley. In front of them, a meadow with all kinds of trees and flowers began to emerge. Thousands of birds of various colors began to migrate to the place, singing their distinctive song. During these moments, Princess Marjan's heart was transformed. A new strength, new hope, new start, new destiny and a new future were ahead. Marjan's eyes brightened with sunlight and her lips outlined a beautiful smile. The smile captivated the shepherd's heart. They were so caught up in the moment, that they didn't perceive the presence of God's warrior coming towards them. "Your Majesties," said the warrior, bowing his head slightly, "I bring you a message from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You have been called and trained to free thousands of people that are still captive. You will travel to many kingdoms and together, face demonic spirits that have enslaved many princes and princesses for too long." The warrior continued, "My warrior will give you the necessary weapons to defeat the enemy. He will give you the key to open any lock and I will be in charge of providing you with the necessary strength in times of weakness. What I open no one can shut, and what I shut no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my father on his throne. And so, it is my wish that you go. It is my order." The shepherd warrior looked at his princess in the eyes, as if asking her if she was up to the responsibility. She looked at him with her teary eyes and a smile and accepted the challenge. "I'm afraid to fail," Saleh admitted Marjan. "I understand you, my love," answered Saleh, kissing her on the lips. "I am convinced that nothing will ever separate us from our love of God. Not life nor death, nor angels or demons. Not even our present fear or worries of tomorrow. Not even hell's powers can separate us from our love of God." Saleh and Marjan held hands as they contemplated the beginning of the awakening of Noor.